They called it the art of God and the sin of man. A secret so dangerous it was burned, banned, and buried for centuries, yet it refused to die, because somewhere in the dark, someone was still searching for gold, for life, for the spark that made creation itself. And it always begins the same way. The smoke comes first, not from fire but from incense, thick and slow, curling through a room lit by brass and breath. It smells of oil, copper, and something older, something that remembers the Nile. A figure moves behind the haze, grinding powder into paste, whispering to glass as if it might listen. Symbols shimmer on the wall, carved into wax, written in ash. Mercury trembles in its vial like quicksilver blood. Gold dust drifts across a flame and disappears. This is not science as we know it. It is prayer disguised as experiment devotion measured in drops and flame. Outside, the centuries shift from pharaohs to philosophers, from monks to mystics, but the hunger stays the same. To touch creation, to master death, to turn what is base and broken into something eternal. Kings will hunt for it, churches will condemn it, and yet, in every age, a few will keep the lamps burning, chasing the shimmer between faith and fire. In the courts of Alexandria, glass vessels glow like captured stars. In medieval abbeys, cloaked figures stir metals by candlelight. And in Victorian London, behind velvet curtains and the hum of machines, the same old dream flickers back to life that somewhere in the chaos of matter lies the divine. The Victorians will call it occultism. The ancients will call it divine art. But every alchemist, across every century, will call it the same thing, hope. So tonight, keep your candle burning low, and your mind open to the dark between truths, because this is where it began, the complete history of alchemy, from the temples of Egypt to the secret chambers of Victorian London. Subscribe and stay with me. There are more secrets to unseal, more metals to awaken, and more nights when even the dead seem to glow. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? The past still stirs in the flask. The smoke rises before the sun. It curls above the water like incense from a god's open hand, drifting over the black fields that give Egypt its name. You stand in the half-light beside the river, watching the first workers cross the sand, their white linen robes dim against the dark earth. Somewhere beyond the papyrus reeds, a heron lifts its wings, and the morning hum begins bees, oars, chants, the pulse of creation itself. The priests are already at their benches. Within the stone chambers of the Per-Ankh, the house of life, fires flicker beneath clay pots. The air smells of oil and ochre, ground copper and burned salt. They do not call it science. They call it Heka, the sacred craft, the power of words and matter made one. Each man works in silence, for silence is part of the ritual. Mortars crush malachite into green dust. Pestles grind gold into leaf, so fine it floats when breathed upon. One drop of river water, one grain of natron, one whispered phrase to Thoth, the scribe of the gods. To an outsider, it might look like worship. To the Egyptians, it is creation repeated. Every transformation, every shimmer of heat above the crucible, mirrors the moment the world was formed from chaos. They believe that metals are alive, that lead is young, unripe gold, still waiting to be perfected. And so, in these early laboratories of faith, men become midwives to the earth itself. Outside, the light grows stronger. Through a narrow opening in the wall, a beam strikes a table of obsidian jars. The glow turns them red as embers. A young apprentice, bare-chested and trembling, holds a lump of ochre between his palms, as if it were a heart. His teacher murmurs a verse. What is above is as what is below. The boy does not understand the words yet, but he will. All true alchemy begins in ignorance and ends in light. By midday, the chamber is thick with heat. Smoke clings to skin and hair. Sweat leaves white trails through the dust. A thin silver liquid rolls across the table, quicksilver, the breath of the moon, the soul of the world made visible. The priests watch it slide and shiver like something alive. They call it Mercury, messenger between heaven and earth. In its mirrored surface, they see not only their faces but the reflection of eternity. At dusk, they pour the cooled mixtures into alabaster flasks and seal them with wax. The river outside glows bronze beneath the fading sky. Across its waters, the pyramids stand like frozen flames, each one a monument to transformation. The workers pack away their tools, but the fires are never fully extinguished. Deep within the temple walls, the smoke continues to rise, whispering of change. And so it begins not as superstition, not as sin, but as reverence. In this land of stone and sun, alchemy is born from the need to preserve what dies, to gild what decays, to promise the soul that it might endure. The Nile carries their ashes downstream, scattering fragments of gold into the sea, a quiet offering to time itself. The sun has already climbed high when the doors of the Ankh swing open. Heat spills into the hall like molten glass. Inside, the air is thick with incense and ink. The House of Life is not merely a building, it is a breathing archive, a heart within the body of Egypt. Every wall is covered in words, not carved as law, but written as prayer columns of ink on papyrus, each one describing the invisible. You walk past rows of scribes, their reed pens whispering over the pages. The sound is steady, hypnotic. Some copy hymns to Ra, others transcribe the recipes of healers, instructions to distill perfume, to make blue pigment from copper and sand, to preserve the dead as if sleep were only a longer breath. The same tools that serve faith now serve transformation. The gods and the elements have begun to share a language. At the center of the hall stands the master scribe. His hands are blackened by soot. His eyes carry the stillness of the river at dusk. Before him lies a roll of papyrus so long it seems endless. On it are symbols no common citizen will ever read: circles, serpents, and stars bound together by lines like veins. This is not mere chemistry, not yet. This is the dream of changing matter through meaning. To name a thing is to alter it. To speak its essence is to command it. In the adjoining chambers, the physicians grind powders while chanting the names of gods. Theirs is a gentler alchemy, one that heals instead of transforms. They believe the body itself is a vessel, a furnace of flesh and breath. When disease strikes, it is not punishment but imbalance. To restore harmony, one must restore the pattern. A little copper for courage, a little honey for the heart, a measure of natron to draw away decay. These are not metaphors but truths in their hands. At night, when the heat softens and the stars ignite above Thebes, the students gather on the roof. They watch the constellations drift and mirror them in bowls of water, tracing the reflections with their fingers. The heavens and the earth, they say, are twins born of the same fire. The formulas inscribed in their scrolls are written copies of those constellations, fragments of divine order made tangible. If a man can learn their rhythm, perhaps he can learn to create life itself. Below, the Nile murmurs in the dark. Somewhere, a priest feeds oil to a flame that must never go out. That fire is the breath of the temple, its pulse, its eternal experiment. The alchemists of Egypt do not yet dream of gold. They dream of balance, of permanence. To them, the gods are not distant beings, but patterns of heat and motion that can be learned, coaxed, repeated. In the House of Life, thought itself becomes a substance. Words are minerals, prayer is metal, and knowledge patient, endless, shimmering in the lamplight is the only true elixir they have ever found. Night lingers in the courtyards of the temple, but the scribes are already awake. Candles gutter in shallow bowls of oil, and the flame bends each time a whisper moves through the hall. It is not the wind, it is prayer, the slow, rhythmic invocation of Thoth, Lord of Wisdom, keeper of the written word. His ibis-headed image watches from the wall, painted in gold and lapis, holding a reed pen and a crescent moon. Every alchemist in Egypt begins the day beneath his gaze. In this hour, the work is not with stone or metal, but with breath. The priests believe the breath of Thoth is what animates every transformation. When they heat copper until it glows or grind gold until it fades to dust, they breathe upon it. They say the exhalation of man completes the exhalation of the divine. To the Egyptians, words themselves are living vapors, able to change the structure of what they touch. The laboratory becomes a sanctuary. Every spoken syllable is both prayer and experiment. You can almost hear it, the measured recitation that fills the chamber, the tapping of reeds against wet papyrus, the pulse of the bellows feeding air into the furnace. Flames rise in color, from yellow to blue to the strange green shimmer that they call the soul of copper. They record it carefully, the exact shade, the rhythm of the fire, the moment the smoke turns clear. To them, this is language, a dialogue between the seen and the unseen. Near the furnace stands a bowl filled with mercury, gleaming like frozen moonlight. When disturbed, it breaks into beads that roll across the table and then merge again, as if remembering unity. The alchemists call it the living metal, a mirror of the soul's journey through dissolution and rebirth. In the movement of that quicksilver, they see their own reflection fragmented, restless, eternal. At dusk, the high priest ascends the steps to the outer terrace. He carries a bronze bowl filled with water from the Nile. The surface shimmers, catching the red of the setting sun. One by one, his apprentices approach. He dips a finger into the bowl and marks their foreheads with a circle, the sign of completion, of the union between heaven and earth. The circle is Thoth's seal, the shape of breath returning to itself. Beyond the temple walls, the world is shifting. Traders arrive from Crete, from Byblos, from lands no Egyptian map dares name. They bring spices, oils, and fragments of unfamiliar stone, blue as midnight, white as bone. The priests test them all. Some dissolve, some burn, some sing when struck. Knowledge spreads through contact like fire leaping from wick to wick. Soon the art of Egypt will no longer belong only to Egypt. But for now, the night deepens again, and the scribes continue to write. Smoke drifts toward the rafters, curling around the statue of Thoth until it looks as though the god himself exhales it. The temple grows quiet, only the whisper of pens, the flicker of flame, and the breath of wisdom moving through stone. It is said that every word written in this place carries a spark of immortality, and in that spark, alchemy begins to take form not merely as worship, but as the first science of the soul. The dawn breaks in silence over the two lands, Kemet, the black earth, and Deshret, the red. From the high terrace of the temple, you can see the colors meet where the river ends and the desert begins. The black soil, rich with the gift of the Nile, gleams with promise. Beyond it stretches the red dust of death, the endless sand that devours all things. The Egyptians say life itself is a conversation between these two colors every day, born from their meeting, every soul tested between their extremes. The alchemists have long watched this balance. To them, black and red are not mere shades, but symbols of the universe's rhythm. The black is matter, unformed and fertile. The red is fire, transformation, the consuming breath of the sun. When a priest mixes iron oxide with ochre or heats copper until it blushes scarlet, he does not see color, he sees the dialogue of gods. Black is the beginning of creation, red is its purification. Together, they tell the story of everything that lives, dies, and becomes again. Inside the temple, the furnaces echo that truth. The crucibles are blackened from years of smoke. The flames that lick their rims burn red as coals in a tomb. Every time an alchemist stirs molten metal with a bronze rod, he repeats the sacred process of the Nile's own cycle. The flooding, the retreat, the rebirth of the fields. The priests whisper that what happens in the river happens in the soul. To transform, lead into gold, one must pass through both lands, corruption and renewal, darkness and flame. In the cool chambers below the temple, scribes inscribe these symbols on papyrus scrolls. They record not only recipes and ratios, but parables of color and change. The blackness precedes light. One line reads, "In it, all potential sleeps. Another, the red arises when spirit enters the body. To the Egyptians, color is not seen but felt. It is the vibration of being itself. They wear amulets of carnelian for courage, obsidian for silence, gold for eternity. Each pigment is a key, and the world is the lock they try to open. By evening, the horizon is a mirror of the crucible. The sun sinks red into the black earth, and the priests step outside to greet the dying light. The sand radiates heat, even as the air cools. In their hands, they carry bowls filled with the day's ashes, remnants of burned herbs, powdered stone, and failed mixtures. These they scatter into the river, letting the Nile carry away what could not be perfected. The act is both surrender and renewal for tomorrow. They will begin again, certain that within failure lies the seed of transformation. The wind rises from the west, carrying the desert's breath through the open halls. It smells of iron and salt, of endings and beginnings. Somewhere in that endless exchange between black and red, between death and creation, the first language of alchemy is born. It is not written, not yet it lives in color, in fire, in the hush between beat, the river's murmur and the sand's sigh. And those who listen closely enough can hear it speaking still. In the hush before sunrise, the temple courtyard feels alive, not with movement, but with presence, the invisible breath that the Egyptians call Ka. Every living thing, they say, possesses this inner double, a second self made of light and shadow, tethered to the flesh, but longing to be free. The Ka eats, drinks, dreams, and waits. To feed, it is devotion. To understand, it is power. And to the earliest alchemists, it is the key to eternity itself. The priests move quietly between the tombs, balancing jars of oil and honey, bits of bread, and petals of lotus laid upon polished stone. The offerings are not for the dead, but for what remains of them, the Ka, still wandering, still remembering the weight of the body. These rituals are older than the pyramids, older even than the hieroglyphs that name the gods, yet within them hides a single, audacious question. If the soul can survive the body's decay, can matter itself do the same? Inside the embalming chamber, that question becomes experiment. The air is heavy with natron and resin, the lamps burn low. The embalmer's knives are made of obsidian, their hands steady as they draw lines of precision across the silent flesh. They remove what must rot, wash what can endure, and pack the cavities with salt and linen. What remains is not death but preservation, a body transmuted by art into something between the two worlds. The priests call it purification. The philosophers will one day call it transformation. On the walls, painted figures show the journey of the Ka, its departure from the corpse, its passage through darkness, its arrival in the field of reeds. But to the men who work beneath these murals, the myth is not only a promise, it is instruction. They see in each step of embalming a pattern that might apply to metal, to stone, to anything perishable. If the right balance of heat and salt can keep the flesh from corruption, perhaps another formula could keep lead from decay. To preserve is to triumph over time. In a small adjoining room, a young acolyte kneels before a slab of alabaster. On it rests a fragment of gold leaf, barely thicker than a breath. He touches it with reverence. Gold does not tarnish. It gleams through centuries, immune to air, to water, to death. It is the flesh of the gods, unaging, incorruptible, the perfect body. The boy wonders if the Ka of a man could be housed in such purity, if immortality could be forged rather than granted. The thought frightens him. He says nothing, but the idea will travel through papyrus and time until it finds its home in the dreams of alchemists yet unborn. Outside, the Nile begins to glow with dawn. The priests pour libations into the water, whispering blessings to the hidden spirits that drift beneath the surface. The river swallows their words, carrying them to the sea where no one returns from the same. And yet, something remains, a shimmer, a breath, a reflection that refuses to fade. In that reflection, the alchemists see proof of the car and a promise that nothing truly dies. It only changes its form. The sails appear first white triangles on the horizon, bright as teeth in the morning sun. They move against the current, slow but steady, toward the mouth of the Nile. The priests on the riverbank pause in their work. Foreigners again. The Greeks have come, not soldiers this time, but thinkers, wanderers from the islands, carrying scrolls instead of spears. They come not for conquest, but for what Egypt has always kept hidden, the knowledge written in fire and stone. By the time they reach Alexandria, the air itself seems to shimmer with curiosity. The city is new, but its heart beats with ancient rhythms. Temples rise beside marble forums. The chants of Egyptian priests mingle with the syllables of Plato and Pythagoras. Traders unload jars of papyrus and copper ingots, and among them walk men in simple robes, asking questions about gods, metals, and the movement of the stars. To the Egyptians, these questions sound almost childlike. To the Greeks, they are the beginning of philosophy. Inside the Library of Alexandria, the great experiment begins. Scribes copy the papyri of the Perank, translating them into Greek. The word hika, once sacred, becomes techne, art, craft, technique. The meaning shifts but does not die. The Greeks see in Egyptian alchemy a mirror of their own desire to explain the universe only here. Explanation takes the form of ritual. They borrow what they can, reshape it into logic, and call it chemia, the art of the Black Land. In the workshops along the harbor, furnaces roar beside marble colonnades. Greek and Egyptian artisans work side by side, melting metal and distilling perfumes, recording the outcomes in both hieroglyphs and alphabets. They notice patterns, how mercury eats away at copper, how sulfur changes its color, how heat can coax order from chaos. Slowly, the gods of Egypt become ideas. Thoth becomes Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great, patron of wisdom and transformation. His words, written in smoke and symbol, will one day form the heart of 1,000 manuscripts. At dusk, philosophers gather on the steps of the Serapeum. The air smells of myrrh and brine. They speak of matter and spirit, of opposites united through motion. An old Egyptian priest listens in silence, then points toward the setting sun. "You talk of theory," he says softly. "We have watched the same truth in the river for 5,000 years. The Greeks nod, half understanding. They do not yet see that alchemy is not a method, but a language, one spoken in color, heat, and silence. As the night deepens, the sea wind sweeps through the streets, carrying sparks from the lamps of the harbor. Somewhere, a young scribe in the library bends over his scroll, drawing the first known symbol for transformation, a circle divided by a line. Above it, he writes the new word that will outlive empires, chemia. It will travel west, change tongues, survive wars and burnings, and one day be whispered again in another age, under another sun, by men who believe they have rediscovered it. For now, the Greeks sleep beside the Nile, and the stars shimmer on the water like molten silver. The old gods of Egypt do not speak, but they watch. They have seen this before the passing of knowledge like a torch, the endless hunger to know how the world is made, and whether man might one day learn to make himself anew. The Library of Alexandria stands at the edge of the sea like a temple made of sunlight. Its walls gleam with pale stone, its colonnades hum with footsteps and whispers. Inside, the air is warm and dry, papyrus and dust, oil lamps and sweat. Thousands of scrolls sleep here, bound in silence, each one containing the memory of a life, a kingdom, a miracle. The scribes call it the House of Knowledge, but to the alchemists who work in the shadowed rooms beneath, it is something more. It is a furnace. By day, the scholars come and go, arguing beneath painted ceilings. Greek philosophers quote Egyptian hymns. Priests from Memphis debate the mathematics of heaven. Every room smells faintly of ink and wine. On the upper floors, the astronomers track the wandering stars. Below, in the archives where the light is thin, the true work continues the gathering of hidden knowledge from every corner of the known world. Scrolls from Babylon, tablets from Persia, even fragments said to come from the ruined libraries of Nineveh. The dream of Alexandria is not conquest, but preservation. Yet every act of preservation carries a secret fear. What happens if the fire that gives light also consumes? At dusk, the furnaces in the lower chambers burn blue. Alchemists in linen and ash test mixtures of cinnabar and mercury, heating them until the air ripples with fumes. They believe fire is the voice of the gods, unpredictable, consuming, creative. What they do not yet know is that one day, that same fire will find its way upstairs. But tonight, it behaves like a faithful servant. Copper glows red, glass melts clear, and symbols are drawn on cooled stone. The results are recorded in quiet haste, sealed with wax, hidden among the shelves of philosophy. You can almost see the glow through the floorboards as night settles over the city. Outside, the waves strike the harbour walls. The torches along the quay sway in the wind. A single careless spark from a lamp, a candle, a furnace could undo everything. And somewhere, among the corridors, that spark is waiting. When the soldiers come years later, decades perhaps, depending on who tells the story, the library is full of smoke. The scrolls hiss as they burn, curling inward like dying leaves. Men run through the corridors carrying armfuls of manuscripts, trying to save what can be saved. Some plunge into the sea, clutching soaked papyri to their chests. Others kneel before the flames as if before a god. The sky above Alexandria turns black. What survives is carried in memory. A handful of fragments copied in secret, words of Hermes, verses on the nature of fire and rebirth. To later ages, it will seem like myth, the moment when light devoured itself. But to the few who watched the smoke rise over the harbour, it is revelation. Fire, they realize, does not destroy knowledge, it transforms it. When the embers die, the ash remains black, fine, silent. The last surviving alchemist of Alexandria scoops a handful into his palm. It feels warm, almost alive. He closes his fingers around it, whispering a single phrase from the ruined scrolls. As above, so below. The wind carries the ashes out to sea, scattering them like seeds. In that quiet dispersal, alchemy survives hidden, reborn, waiting to ignite again in another age. The desert wind moves through the ruins like breath through a hollow reed. The library is gone, its shelves reduced to ash, its scholars to rumour, yet the air around Alexandria still trembles with what it once held. The city has changed hands many times now. Greek, Roman, Egyptian again. Empires rise and fade, but in the forgotten corners of temples and storerooms, something older endures. Not a text, not a formula, but a whisper. They call it the Hermetic word. It begins with fragments, scraps of parchment found in clay jars, words copied from memory by men who had seen the library burn. The language is strange, neither purely Greek nor Egyptian. The words read like a conversation between heaven and the earth. What is below is as what is above, and what is above is as what is below, to accomplish the miracles of the One. Scholars will later call this the Emerald Tablet, a leaf from a book that never truly existed, said to be written by Hermes Trismegistus Thoth, reborn in the tongue of philosophers. No one knows who first shaped the myth, or if Hermes was ever a man. To the priests who fled Alexandria, he was divine wisdom itself, the union of reason and revelation. To the Romans who arrived after them, he was a sage who had unlocked the pattern of creation. The story grows, as all sacred things do. In candle-lit chambers and desert monasteries, scribes copy his teachings by hand. Each time they do, the words shift slightly, new meanings bloom like mold in the margins. Soon, the Hermetic writings begin to speak of metals, of stars, of the invisible currents that flow between all things. In one small cell overlooking the Nile, A lone philosopher studies these fragments by lamplight. He reads until dawn, until the letters blur into shapes of fire. The texts tell him that the world itself is alive, that every stone, every leaf, every star holds a soul, and that to know its soul is to command it. He lifts a cup of water to the flame and watches as bubbles rise, shimmering like tiny worlds. As above, so below. If the heavens burn, the earth must mirror them. If man is made of dust, then dust must contain something divine. Outside, the priests still chant their hymns to Ra, and the Roman guards still patrol the streets. But the philosopher no longer hears them. He is listening to something deeper, a rhythm hidden beneath the noise of the world. The Hermetic word has entered him like breath. It is no longer just text, it is method. To observe is to become, to transmute is to understand. The boundary between matter and spirit begins to dissolve. By morning, the first rays of sun spill across his table, turning the ink on his parchment to gold. He sets down his pen and looks out toward the sea. The city sleeps, unaware that something vast has been reborn in silence. The old gods are fading, the empires shifting, but the Hermetic word will travel carried by sailors, monks, and dreamers across centuries and compaying continents. In the still air, a single phrase lingers, soft as a pulse. The world is not made, it is remembered. And in that remembering, the alchemist will one day find his art. The city outside is loud hammers on stone, merchants shouting in the forum, the shuffle of sandals through the dust. But inside the workshop, there is only fire. The walls are blackened from years of smoke, the floor scored with the tracks of spilled metals and forgotten experiments. The alchemist works alone, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his hands steady as he feeds the bellows. The furnace sighs, and the air fills with that scent only transformation knows: copper, oil, and ash. He has read the words of Hermes, copied them until his fingers bled. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great ingenuity. Yet each time he tries, the meaning eludes him. Does it speak of matter or of the self? He watches as the metal glows in the crucible, red deepening to white, the color of breath itself. To purify the metal, he must let it die, let it burn, let it shed everything unworthy of permanence. And in that surrender, he begins to see a mirror. For days he has not spoken. He eats little, sleeps less. When he closes his eyes, he sees not flame but the image of his own reflection, distorted through heat. The more he works, the more he understands. The furnace does not change the metal alone, it changes him. The same laws that govern matter govern the soul. As copper sheds its dross, so must he shed envy, fear, pride. The fire is both weapon and teacher. In its light, nothing can lie. Outside, dusk gathers. The last sunlight cuts through the high window, catching on the dust in the air. It glitters like gold for a moment, a promise, a temptation, but he knows now that real gold cannot be made from ore. It must be made from silence, from devotion. He remembers the old Egyptian saying, "He who knows the heart of fire knows the heart of man." The ancients built tombs to preserve their bodies. He builds a furnace to preserve his soul. When the night comes, he opens the furnace door. The air roars as heat floods the room. Inside, the metal trembles, soft and luminous, as if alive. He leans closer. For a breath, he thinks he sees something move within it, a shimmer shaped like a human outline. Small, unfinished, flickering in the glow. The vision is gone before he can name it, but it leaves a truth behind. Perhaps the soul itself is an alloy, a mixture of the divine and the earthly, waiting for the right balance to endure. He lets the fire die slowly. In the quiet that follows, he feels a calm he has never known. The furnace still smokes, the crucible still glows faintly, but he no longer needs to look inside. The transformation has already begun, not in the vessel, but within him. He writes a single line on a scrap of parchment and seals it in wax. The gold sought in matter is but the shadow of the gold sought in spirit. When dawn returns, he carries the cooled metal to the river and drops it into the current. It sinks without sound, leaving only a faint ripple, a small disturbance, swallowed by the flow. The alchemist watches until it disappears, his hands stained with soot, his face marked by the light of his own becoming. The furnace has gone cold, but within him burns a different fire, one that will outlast the age of empires. The wind comes from the west, dry and relentless, carrying grains of red sand that hiss against the temple walls. The last alchemists of Egypt have gone to ground. The libraries are gone, the scholars dispersed, the language of Thoth fading from the mouths of men. Rome has swallowed the world, and with it the memory of the ancient art. But deep in the desert, where the dunes move like tides and silence grows thicker than prayer, something survives. You can find it if you know where to look: a flicker of smoke at twilight, a flash of polished copper beneath the cliffs of Thebes, a scent of burning resin in an abandoned monastery. There, among the ruins and the shifting sands, the old priests continue their work. They wear no jewels, no white robes now, only dust. Their temples have become caves, their crucibles simple clay pots warmed over camel dung and sunfire. Yet when they mix their powders, ochre, salt, malachite, the air hums as it once did in the house of life. It is not splendor that sustains the art, but memory. By day, they sleep in shadow. By night, they emerge to work beneath the stars, reading their formulas by moonlight. Each constellation above them is a recipe, each movement of the heavens an instruction. The gods no longer answer prayers, but the sky still speaks. One priest, old as the stones themselves, tells his apprentice that all knowledge is cyclic, that truth must vanish to be reborn. The desert keeps what men forget, he says, stirring molten bronze, and it returns it when they are ready again. They hide their writings carefully, rolled papyri sealed in jars, buried beneath cairns or tucked into tombs of forgotten nobles. Some are disguised as funerary texts, others written in riddles no thief would care to decipher. A few they destroy altogether, trusting the essence of the words to live in the sand, in the air, in the whisper of the flame. They no longer write for kings or temples, but for the future, for someone who will understand that alchemy is not about metal or treasure, but remembrance. Once each year, when the Nile floods and the waters creep close to the edge of the desert, the hidden alchemists gather. They come from oases, from ruined shrines, from salt caves far to the south. They meet in silence, exchanging small files and fragments of scrolls. No names are spoken. They greet one another not as masters and disciples, but as keepers of the same fading light. In the starlight, they perform the oldest ritual, burning incense of frankincense and myrrh, then scattering the ashes into the wind. The smoke rises, curling like a serpent, vanishing into the black vault of the sky. When the Romans finally arrive with their legions and torches, they find nothing. No temple, no gold, no formulas. Only the sand, endless, indifferent, eternal. The soldiers leave, cursing the emptiness, but as their footprints fade, the wind begins to move again, uncovering a small stone tablet, etched with a single line. All that is hidden will return, and so it does. The desert keeps the secret, as it always has: the ashes of the library, the breath of the priests, the memory of transformation sleeping just beneath the dust, waiting for the next age to remember what this one had to forget. The desert sleeps, but the world beyond it wakes again. The old empire has fallen, its temples crumble beneath the weight of time. Yet knowledge, like mercury, refuses to vanish. It slips between cracks, gleams in the dark, and reforms wherever human hands are willing to hold it. Eastward, beyond the ruins of Alexandria, beyond the silence of the Red Sea, a new flame begins to stir. It burns not in stone temples, but in paper and ink. In the city of Baghdad, under the caliphs of the House of Wisdom, The lamps never go out. The air inside the great translation halls smells of parchment, oil, and sweat, the perfume of rebirth. Scholars from every corner of the known world gather here. Persians, Syrians, Greeks, and Egyptians long removed from their homeland. They carry scrolls salvaged from the wreckage of ages, some half-burned, others no more than fragments of letters. Around long wooden tables, they unroll these ghosts and begin to read. By day, the translators work in pairs. One recites the Greek, another writes the Arabic, their voices blending in a rhythm as old as prayer. The words of Hermes, of Aristotle, of the vanished masters of Alexandria, find new shape in a new tongue. The process is slow, almost ritualistic. When a passage resists translation, they argue gently, tracing the letters with their fingers, searching for the hidden sense behind the words. Sometimes the meaning appears like a spark in darkness. Sometimes it vanishes just as quickly, leaving only smoke. By night, the scribes of Baghdad become alchemists of language. They do not melt metals, but ideas, transmuting one culture into another. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the city's markets fall silent, the translators read aloud the texts of ancient chemistry, recipes for dissolving copper, methods for distilling rosewater, formulas for binding gold leaf to glass. To them, these are not relics, but revelations. Fire and ink have become one pursuit. Knowledge itself is the element they seek to purify. One man stands apart from the others. His name is Jabir ibn Hayyan. They say he has memorized more books than any man alive, and that he dreams in symbols. He watches the translators at work, his hands always stained with soot, his eyes bright with sleeplessness. For Jabir, translation is only the beginning. He sees in these Greek and Egyptian fragments a map, one that leads beyond imitation, toward discovery. The ancients spoke of transmutation as metaphor. He will make it method. He will measure, weigh, and record what the priests once called divine. Outside the house of wisdom, the desert wind has changed its song. It carries not the scent of incense but of ink and acid. Across the caliphate, furnaces are built, glassware refined, metals tested and catalogued. The words that once belonged to the gods now belong to scholars. Alchemy, reborn in Arabic, has found a new purpose, no longer the worship of permanence, but the pursuit of precision. And, yet, beneath the mathematics and the flame, the old spirit survives. In every laboratory, before the first experiment begins, the apprentices light a lamp and whisper the name Hermes al-Haramaisa, Hermes the Wise. They do not pray for success, they pray for understanding, because they know, as all who came before them knew, that every act of translation is also an act of resurrection. The dead speak again, and through their words, the ancient fire burns anew. The night in Kufa smells of ink and sulfur. The lamps along the narrow alleys burn blue in the desert wind, and behind the thick mud brick walls of his home, Jabir ibn Hayyan works alone. His pupils have long since gone to sleep, but his pen still scratches softly against parchment. Around him lie scattered notes, pages filled with numbers, circles, and verses, half in Arabic, half in Greek. A crucible glows red on the table beside him, and the air vibrates with the low hiss of transformation. He is not a priest, nor exactly a scientist, not yet. He is something between the two, a man standing on the threshold between the sacred and the measurable. The ancients whispered of divine fire. Jabir seeks to trap it, to understand it, to name it. For him, alchemy is no longer faith alone, it is the discipline of precision. His tools are glass and copper, but his true instrument is observation. He watches how flame eats mercury, how silver breathes under heat, how one metal devours another until neither is itself. Each change, each flicker of smoke, he records with patient reverence. His students call him the alchemist of numbers. To Jabir, every element is a fraction of creation's equation. He believes that matter and soul share a single structure, one that can be described through proportion and balance. gold is perfect not because it shines, but because its harmony is absolute. Corruption, decay, impurity, these are only imbalances. To correct them is to imitate the Creator. All nature, he writes, is a process of refining. Man is the furnace, the world is the crucible. When the sun rises, the city stirs. Merchants shout, donkeys bray, the call to prayer ripples through the streets. But Jabir does not stop. He has seen something in the flame, a pattern hidden in the dance of heat. He calls it al-mizan, the balance. Everything, from the stars above to the bones beneath the skin, is governed by it. His laboratory becomes a reflection of the cosmos. He arranges his jars by symmetry, his instruments by ratio, his ingredients by correspondence. Even the act of breathing becomes a rhythm of purification. One evening, his apprentice rushes in, coughing from the fumes of the furnace. The experiment has failed. The mixture has turned black, thick, inert. Jabir studies it quietly, then smiles. Blackness, he says, is the beginning of light. He writes it down in the margin of his notes, the stage of nigredo, the darkening, the first step in transformation. To the priests of old, this would have been allegory. To Jabir, it is process. The metaphors of Egypt and Greece have become method. By the time his manuscripts spread through the caliphate, Jabir's name will already be legend. His books will number in the hundreds, too many for one man to have written, yet all bearing his thought. Centuries later, his Latin translators will call him Geber and whisper that he possessed the secret of life. But in this moment, alone in the dim light of his workshop, Jabir seeks nothing as grand. He wants only to see truth take shape in the crucible, to hold in his hands the proof that creation still burns, steady and alive, in the heart of man. Outside, the first stars appear over the desert. Their light falls through the open window, glinting on the rim of the furnace. The fire stirs as if answering them, a spark between heaven and earth, between reason and faith. Jabir leans close, whispering a prayer not to God, but to the flame itself. It is not worship, not entirely. It is recognition. The fire has learned to speak his language, and for the first time, it seems to whisper back. The workshop of Jabir ibn Hayyan hums like a beehive. Jars line the shelves, powders, salts, and oils collected from every edge of the caliphate. The walls are dark with smoke, the floor sticky with old experiments. Yet amid the chaos, the master moves with calm precision. His hands are sure, his gaze steady. To his students, it seems he already knows the results of each reaction before the fire is even lit. But Jabir smiles when they say this. Knowledge, he tells them, is not what you hold, it is what you purify. By now his theories have spread far beyond Kufa. Scholars in Damascus, Basra, and Cairo argue over his writings. Some treat them as scripture, others as riddles. Few understand that the true gold he seeks cannot be minted. His alchemy is of the soul. He writes of takwin, the act of bringing to perfection not just metals, but man himself. The furnace, he says, mirrors the heart. The impurities of copper are no different from those that cloud the spirit. Every substance yearns for refinement. Every being strives toward harmony. To transmute, lead into gold, is to awaken the divine, hidden in the base. His students learn by repetition, grinding, distilling, heating, and recording. Their hands tremble from long hours at the flame. Jabir watches them patiently. When a crucible cracks, he does not scold. Everything breaks, he murmurs. The question is what it becomes after. He walks among them, checking the color of vapors, the clarity of liquids, the smell of each experiment. The room is alive with change, a dozen tiny worlds transforming at once. Yet above it all floats a quiet devotion. This is not a laboratory. It is a place of prayer where the liturgy is chemistry. At night, when the lamps are low and the city sleeps, Jabir writes. He writes of sulfur and mercury as cosmic opposites, male and female, heaven and earth, soul and body. He records the 4 stages of transformation: blackening, whitening, yellowing, and reddening nigredo, albedo, citrinitas, rubedo. These are not only the colors of metals under heat, they are the colors of awakening. He sketches the human form beside the crucible, a reminder that every experiment mirrors the self. The fire that burns in the vessel, he writes, is the same that burns in the heart. Sometimes he steps outside to breathe the desert air. The night is cool, the stars sharp as blades. The Tigris murmurs in the distance. He thinks of the old temples of Egypt, of Hermes and Thoth, of priests who whispered to flames long before his birth. They sought eternity in metal. He seeks balance in thought. Yet their longing is the same, to touch the infinite through the finite, to find order within decay. When dawn arrives, Jabir returns to his desk. The furnace still glows faintly, the last embers pulsing like the heartbeat of an idea. He pours a small vial of liquid gold onto a plate and watches it harden into crystal. The substance is useless, brittle, impure, but its color holds him captive. It gleams like understanding. In that light, he sees not wealth, but clarity, a gold that cannot be spent, only known. He closes his eyes and smiles. The true transmutation, he realizes, is not of matter into treasure, but of ignorance into wisdom. And that kind of gold, the gold of the mind, never cools, never fades, and never belongs to any one man. The old scholars of Kufa say that Jabir died with ink on his fingers. No one saw him buried, and no tomb bears his name. But the manuscripts remain, hundreds of them, copied and recopied, passed from hand to trembling hand across the deserts and seas. Their pages are filled with symbols and riddles, diagrams of circles within circles, serpents biting their own tails. To some, they are nonsense. To others, they are scripture. And to a few, those who read not only with the eye but with the spirit, they contain something more, a secret that has nothing to do with gold. It is the elixir, the hidden heart of alchemy. The texts call it many names: al-iksir, the quintessence, the water of life. In one passage, it is described as a red powder that glows in the dark. In another, as a liquid that can heal any wound. But the wise know better. The elixir is not a substance, but a state. It is the perfect balance between all opposites: fire and water, body and soul, heaven and earth. To find it, one must refine the self until no separation remains. In the monasteries of Syria and the courts of Persia, scholars pore over Jabir's cryptic phrases. They weigh his words as carefully as he weighed his metals. Some attempt to reproduce his experiments, grinding cinnabar, distilling mercury, heating mixtures until they glow. Others meditate over his symbols, seeking meaning in the geometry of flame. Each believes himself close to the secret, yet each finds only reflection, his own face shining back from the surface of the crucible. One night in Haran, beneath a sky alive with stars, a scholar named Khalid ibn Yazid studies by lamplight. The air smells of resin and parchment. Before him lies a small flask sealed with wax, said to contain a trace of the elixir. It was passed to him by an Egyptian monk who died whispering Jabir's name. Khalid holds it up to the light. The liquid inside glows faintly, gold and crimson at once. For a moment, he feels heat radiate from it, or perhaps from his own hand. He thinks he hears a voice, soft as a sigh. What you seek is already within you. The flame of his lamp wavers, and the glow inside the flask fades. When he opens it, there is nothing but clear water. He writes the experience in his notes, unable to decide whether it was revelation or exhaustion. The elixir hides itself, he writes. When I seek it, it flees. When I cease to seek, it appears. In that paradox lies the essence of the philosopher's secret, the truth that the transformation of matter mirrors the transformation of spirit, and that no man can possess what he has not become. Years pass. The manuscripts travel west with traders, monks, and dreamers. In each new tongue, the meaning shifts but endures. The elixir remains both myth and mirror, a promise that the divine still moves through the dust. The alchemists keep their furnaces lit, hoping to glimpse again that brief shimmer of understanding. But in their hearts, they already know what Jabir knew. The true elixir is not found in the flask, but in the fire that burns to create it. And so the secret endures invisible, eternal, whispered from teacher to student across centuries, a single phrase that no translation can contain. To know the stone, become the stone. Centuries pass. The desert winds bury the old cities, the lamps of Baghdad dim, and Europe pale, cold, and bruised by war begins to awaken. Traders bring spices and silks from the east, but hidden among their cargo are scrolls, heavy with dust and the faint smell of oil. Written in Arabic, copied from Greek, born of Egypt, they are fragments of a language no longer spoken aloud, the science of transformation. And when they reach the monasteries of Spain and Sicily, the scribes stare at them with awe and fear. In the stone halls of Toledo, the first translators bend over these strange texts. The lamps flicker, throwing restless shadows on the walls. A monk murmurs the opening lines. In the name of the most merciful, the fire reveals what the heart conceals. He crosses himself. The words feel dangerous, alive, somehow. The Church allows translation for study, not practice, but curiosity is a hunger not easily silenced. He dips his pen and begins. Arabic becomes Latin, and alchemia becomes alchemia. The word changes, and with it, the world. Soon, the scholars of Christendom whisper of Jabir, whom they call Geber. His formulas spread through cloisters and candle-lit universities, filled with talk of sulfur, mercury, and the elixir of life. To the monks who have never seen the desert or the Nile, it all feels like sorcery. Yet something in the rhythm of those words draws them in. Here, at last, is a bridge between the sacred and the tangible, proof that the divine might hide not only in scripture, but in the structure of matter itself. The abbeys become laboratories. Beneath stained glass windows, novices heat crucibles over small fires, careful not to let the scent of smoke drift into the chapel. The clang of tongs and the hiss of boiling mercury mix with the toll of bells. They test Jabir's recipes, mixing saltpeter and vitriol, and sometimes the results are wondrous. Blue flames, golden vapors, metal that changes its color under light. Other times, the crucibles explode. Word spreads of monks blinded or burned, and still the experiments continue. The abbots call it folly, the brothers call it revelation. In France, the manuscripts reach the hands of philosophers who will one day shape modern thought. They copy the Arabic numerals, the geometric symbols, the diagrams of elements dancing around a central sun. They do not yet understand that these symbols once meant spirit as well as substance. The sacred has begun to fade, replaced by method. Alchemy, stripped of its Egyptian heart and its Persian fire, becomes a Latin shadow, half faith, half curiosity, and all yearning. Yet even in translation, something divine survives. In a monastery near Paris, an old monk works alone by candlelight. He reads the final line of a Geber text, "As all things were created from one, so all return to one." He looks up from the parchment, his face pale in the glow. Outside, snow falls quietly, covering the earth in white silence. He whispers the phrase again, this time as prayer, not science. And in that still moment, between breath and flame, he feels it, the old pulse of the ancient art, alive even here, reborn in another tongue. The words may have crossed from Arabic to Latin, from Egypt to Christendom, but the fire they describe is the same. It glows unseen in monasteries and cellars, carried by those who translate not just language, but wonder itself. And so the shadow lengthens across Europe, thin, faint, yet unbroken, the quiet promise that the gold of the spirit still waits to be found. The abbey stands on a hill wrapped in mist, its stones cold with centuries of prayer. Inside, the corridors echo with the hush of Latin hymns and the soft scuff of sandals on worn floors. To the brothers who live here, time feels circular days spent in chant, in work, in silence, repeating like breath. But beneath this rhythm, In the dark below the chapel, another rhythm stirs, the pulse of fire. Brother Matthias tends it nightly. By day, he copies psalms in the scriptorium, his quill gliding through holy words. But when the bells toll for midnight, he descends the narrow stairs to the cellar, where an old furnace glows beneath a cross of soot. It is his secret labor, begun after reading a strange manuscript sent from Toledo, a translation of Geber's Liber Fornicum. To him, it felt less like a book than a confession. The fire, it said, is the instrument of faith, for in its purging, matter remembers its divine origin. At first, he thought it heresy, but the more he read, the more it felt like revelation. Was not the soul itself refined by trial? Was not sin burned away by penance? If the body is dust, and dust can be purified by flame, then perhaps salvation, too, is a kind of alchemy. The abbey sleeps while he works. The crucibles hiss softly, their contents shifting between shadow and light. He measures powders by moonlight, grinding salt, sulfur, and quicksilver in a mortar until they glimmer like powdered stars. His breath fogs the air. He murmurs prayers between each step, Pater Noster, quies in caelis, blending devotion with experiment. He does not seek gold or glory. He seeks understanding, a proof that the language of chemistry and the language of heaven speak of the same thing. Sometimes, when the furnace flares too bright, he fears discovery. The prior forbids pagan sciences, and rumors of alchemical work have already drawn the attention of inquisitors. Yet Matthias cannot stop. Each night, as he stirs the molten mixture, he sees reflections dance on the crucible's surface, faces, fleeting and luminous, like the saints in stained glass. He wonders if he is seeing what the ancients saw, the divine hiding in matter, the spark of creation reflected in the smallest of transformations. Weeks pass. His experiments fail more often than they succeed. Once, a vessel cracks, sending a plume of vapor through the room that smells of vinegar and roses. It clings to his robe for days. The brothers notice, whispering that he smells of incense and sin. He laughs quietly. If only they knew how close both can be. One winter evening, his mixture turns red gold, thick and glowing, like the sun trapped in liquid form. He lifts the flask and watches the light dance within it. For a moment, he feels weightless, unafraid. Then he hears the chapel bell above, summoning the monks to matins. The sound breaks the spell. He hides the flask behind the altar and climbs the stairs, his hands still warm from the flame. During prayer, he cannot focus. His lips move, but his thoughts remain in the cellar, where the fire still burns. He understands now why the ancients called their works sacred. The furnace is not temptation, it is revelation. In its glow, he sees not sin, but proof that God has written his truth into the smallest atom of the world. When dawn comes, Brother Matthias kneels in the snow outside the abbey and breathes deeply. The air is cold, clean, and merciless. He thinks of his furnace, still whispering below, and feels the same flame flicker behind his ribs. Perhaps heaven is not elsewhere. Perhaps it has always been here waiting, like the philosopher's stone itself, to be found within the faith that dares to burn. Morning light spills through the narrow abbey window, gilding the motes of dust that drift through the air like tiny planets. Brother Matthias has not slept. He sits at his desk in the scriptorium, his inkstone cool, his mind still lit by the memory of the night's fire. Before him lies a blank sheet of vellum. On it, he begins to draw a circle first, then a triangle within, and at its heart, a cross. The symbol looks simple, almost childlike, but he feels its weight in his chest. To him, it is not geometry, it is confession. Around him, the other monks copy scripture in silence, unaware that the brother beside them is translating something far older than Latin. The shapes are not his invention. He has seen them before, faintly scratched into the margins of old alchemical texts, carved into the metal base of ancient flasks, the circle for unity, the triangle for fire and aspiration, the cross for the meeting of heaven and earth. To those who know, It is the whole cosmos drawn in a single breath. To those who don't, it is only ornament. As the bell tolls for prime, Matthias hides the vellum beneath his robes and slips outside. The air is cold and wet, the garden heavy with the scent of rosemary and ash. He walks to the low wall that overlooks the valley. Below him, smoke curls from the village chimneys, small threads of life in the pale winter light. He studies the horizon, tracing the invisible geometry of the world, how the river bends like a serpent through the fields, how the sun rises at the perfect midpoint between two hills. There is pattern everywhere, if one only learns to see it. He returns to the cellar that night and carves the same symbol into the stone wall beside his furnace. The circle gleams faintly in the firelight. He feels no fear, only devotion. In the beginning, he whispers, the Word created the world. But the word was not letters, it was form. The fire roars softly in reply, and for the first time, he understands why the ancients wrote in symbols instead of words. A symbol can contain contradiction, faith and doubt, heaven and flesh without breaking. Words divide, symbols unite. Weeks pass. The emblem begins to appear everywhere in his work. He engraves it on crucibles, on the covers of his notebooks, even on the inside of his rosary box. He believes it protects him, but more than that, it reminds him that creation is not separate from devotion. The act of drawing itself feels like prayer, a silent acknowledgement that truth hides best in simplicity. When the prior finally discovers one of these drawings, he frowns, but says nothing. He cannot read it. He sees only harmless geometry, unaware that it represents heresy wrapped in grace. And so Matthias continues his secret work, each night refining his art, his symbols growing more intricate, his understanding deeper. The day he completes his final manuscript, he seals it with wax, marked by his sign, the circle, the triangle, and the cross. Beneath it, he writes one sentence: "In every form lies the pattern of salvation." He hides the book beneath the chapel floor, confident that someone, centuries hence, will find it. Someone who will understand that the language of alchemy was never about wealth or power, but remembrance, the rediscovery of the divine design that connects all things. Outside, the night sky shimmers with stars forming unseen constellations. They, too, are symbols, lights in the dark, eternal and wordless. The alchemist watches them through the window and feels a quiet certainty settle over him. What can be drawn can be known, and what can be known can be changed. The year turns, and with it, the world begins to stir again. Kingdoms rise from the rubble of plagues and wars, and the scent of gold draws men from every corner of Europe. Monks whisper of relics that heal, nobles commission furnaces for their cellars, and across the narrow streets of Paris, London, and Prague, strange symbols appear above doorways, suns with human faces, serpents devouring their tails, hands clutching circles of flame. The age of faith is giving way to something more dangerous, the age of secrets. In the alleys behind the cathedrals, alchemists now work in shadows. They are no longer monks or scholars, but wanderers, part philosopher, part craftsman, part dreamer. Some call themselves physicians, others magi. They claim descent from Geber, from Hermes, from Moses himself. Their names change with each town they flee, their fortunes rising and collapsing with every failed experiment. Yet they share a single hunger, the search for the stone. A man named Arnaldus of Villanova works by candlelight in Montpellier, convinced that the elixir of life lies hidden in distilled wine. Across the Pyrenees, a Catalan mystic, known as Ramon Llull, writes of divine chemistry of matter redeemed through reason. In Prague, a German friar melts lead under the moon and swears he has seen it glimmer into gold before dissolving again like smoke. The church watches them all with suspicion, unable to decide whether they are saints or sorcerers. The manuscripts travel faster than their authors. A single copy of the secret of secrets passes from king to courtier, from bishop to soldier. Margins fill with annotations. Try mercury twice purified. Pray before heating. The color should be like blood. Every reader leaves a trace. Every experiment adds a rumor. By the time the texts reach Venice or London, no one knows who wrote them first or what is true. Yet hidden beneath the charlatans and frauds, a few still pursue the work as it was meant to be, as a covenant between the visible and the unseen. They write in cipher, embedding their revelations inside allegory. When the sun marries the moon, one writes, and their child is clothed in purple, then shall the world be renewed. To the uninitiated, it is nonsense. To the initiated, instruction. In the cellars of Florence, a young painter named Leonardo sketches furnaces beside human anatomy. He suspects that the same laws that govern pigment and perspective govern the growth of bones. Every act of creation, he writes, is a form of transmutation. To draw the world truly is to understand its chemistry. He does not call it alchemy, but the fire is the same. By the 15th century, Europe hums with secrecy. The printing press has begun to whisper its new gospel, but alchemists still cling to ink and cipher. For knowledge that spreads too easily loses its sanctity. The truest secrets, they say, are those carried by hand and hidden by flame. One evening in Nuremberg, an old alchemist seals a letter to his apprentice with a ring pressed into wax. The seal bears a serpent eating its tail. Inside, he writes only this: guard the fire, not the gold. The first can save the world, the second will destroy it. He locks the furnace, snuffs the candle, and vanishes into the smoke of history. The age of secrets will leave behind no monuments, no tombs, only whispers, fragments of recipes, strange symbols in old margins, and the faint scent of sulfur clinging to parchment. But beneath it all, the fire continues to burn quiet, unseen, patient, waiting for the moment it can rise again into light. The world above is loud, the clatter of carts, the gossip of markets, the toll of bells across the rooftops of Prague. But below, beneath a tavern that smells of smoke and vinegar, the true work of the age continues unseen. The air here is thick with heat and secrecy. In a chamber carved from stone, a single furnace glows, breathing like a living thing. Around it, a dozen vessels hiss and sigh, each containing a world of its own. This is the alchemist's cellar, where poverty and genius share the same candle. The man who tends the fire is called Johannes. No one knows his family name. To the city, he is a recluse, a harmless eccentric who buys too much salt and never attends mass. But down here, beneath the noise of ordinary life, he is a philosopher, a servant of the flame. His hands are black with soot, his beard flecked with ash. He spends his nights coaxing metals to reveal their secrets, and his days sleeping among his jars, the air heavy with the scent of vinegar and brimstone. He owns little, a few books, a crucible, a cracked mirror, but each is sacred to him. The mirror he keeps not for vanity but for reflection. When he works, he watches the metal change color and sees in its shimmer his own expression: hope, despair, devotion. The process is long and merciless. He melts, stirs, fails, begins again. Each failure is a sermon, each success a prayer. On a narrow table beside the furnace lie his notes, lines of Latin interlaced with symbols, suns, moons, serpents, and birds. When the Red King devours the White Queen, one passage reads, "The child will rise, clothed in light." To the ignorant, it is madness. To Johannes, it is truth spoken in code. He knows that the metals he works with are not mere matter but reflections of himself. The Red King is his pride, the White Queen his faith, and the child they seek to create, the philosopher's stone, is not gold at all, but peace. The city above grows colder with each passing winter. Coins lose their worth, and bread is rationed by the church. Alchemists are both courted and condemned. Kings hire them to fill their treasuries. Priests denounce them as heretics. Johannes refuses both. When the bishop's men come to question him, He offers them nothing but wine and smiles. "My furnace," he says, "does not make gold. It makes understanding." They leave confused, suspicious, but empty-handed. That night, when the cellar is quiet again, Johannes kneels before the furnace. The heat reddens his face, beads his brow with sweat. He closes his eyes and whispers, "Show me the truth, and I will ask no more of the world." The crucible answers with a soft pop, a bubble rising, bursting, gone. But in that sound, he feels a strange calm. The work has no end, yet its meaning is infinite. As dawn creeps through the cracks above, he douses the flame, careful not to wake the world that would never understand his devotion. Smoke curls upward, escaping into the streets where it mingles with the breath of bakers and chimney sweeps. No one notices, but in that faint grey ribbon rising from the cobblestones, the dream of alchemy drifts on, invisible, indestructible, eternal. Johannes wipes the soot from his hands and smiles. The cellar may be small, his tools crude, but he knows what the mighty do not, that the truest transformations happen not in gold, but in darkness. The fire will burn again tonight. It always does. He arrives at dawn, when the mists still cling to the fields like breath. No name, no country, only a cloak heavy with road dust, and a small satchel tied shut with twine. The villagers take him for a beggar, a harmless traveller seeking bread and a place to sleep. They cannot know that within his satchel lies a thin folio of parchment, covered in symbols that could change the course of kingdoms, or nothing at all. He does not tell them. He never does. They call him the Adept, though it is not a name he has given himself. It follows him from town to town, whispered by apothecaries and astrologers, by monks who burn candles too long after curfew. He trades not in gold but in knowledge, a recipe for purifying salt, a method for capturing dew before dawn, a charm for calming mercury. Those who listen carefully see the pattern that his tricks are fragments of something vast, a language of matter itself, but he never stays long enough to teach it whole. His life is motion. He travels on foot through Bohemia, Bavaria, across the Alps, into Lombardy. In each city, he finds a cellar or attic where he can light a small fire and restock his mind. He writes only in cipher, his letters wound in spirals across the page. He leaves these pages behind like breadcrumbs for a world not yet ready to follow. Some nights he sleeps in taverns, sharing ale with glassblowers and masons who understand that creation requires both patience and flame. Other nights he sleeps under the stars, reading constellations like formulas written across the sky. To some, he appears as prophet. To others, a fraud. In Prague, he cures a baron's fever with a tincture of ground amber and honey, then flees before the man's servants can accuse him of witchcraft. In Milan, he is summoned by a bishop who demands the secret of transmutation. The adept smiles and shows him his hands rough, burned, scarred from decades of work. "This," he says, "is what gold costs." The bishop dismisses him in anger. Yet weeks later, the man begins building a furnace in his own cellar. Such is the adept's contagion, the fever of transformation. He carries with him a single coin of gold, not for wealth, but for remembrance. It was given to him years ago by his master, the last true alchemist he ever met, who said, "Keep this, not as proof, but as question. When you can no longer tell if this is metal or symbol, you will have learned enough." The coin is worn now, its face rubbed smooth by years of thought. Some nights, the adept turns it in his fingers by firelight, half believing he feels it breathe. He grows older, his beard whitens, his steps slow, but his hunger remains. In the marketplaces, he listens for certain words, tincture, quintessence, stone. Wherever they are spoken, he knows the fire still lives. He teaches briefly, moves on, leaving behind small sparks that others might one day kindle into flame. One winter, while crossing the Rhine, he stops at a frozen inn and writes his final note in the margin of a borrowed book. The The stone is not made but remembered. The world itself is the vessel. He leaves the book behind, unclaimed. When he walks out into the snow, the river mist swallows him whole. Years later, a mason finds that book wedged behind a loose brick. The ink has faded, but the message remains, and though no one remembers the adept's face, his words linger in the air like smoke from a fire that never dies, the scent of longing, the heat of knowing, the endless pilgrimage of those who seek to turn the world to light. The workshop is dim, the single window crusted with frost. The smell of smoke and acid clings to everything, to the old oak table, to the wool coat hanging by the door, to the very air. In the center of the room, the furnace hums faintly, its coals breathing in and out like an old creature dreaming. Before it stands a man named Elias, apprentice no longer but master of his own solitude. His hair is streaked with silver now. His fingers are stained with the ghosts of experiments past. He stares into the crucible, where molten tin trembles beneath a thin crust of ash. For a moment, he sees his reflection warped, colorless, uncertain. Then the surface breaks, and the image vanishes. He sighs. Every experiment ends this way. The metals obey his tools, yet mock his heart. They melt, merge, and reform, but never yield their true secret. And still, he cannot stop watching. Somewhere inside the transformation, he senses recognition. On his workbench lies an old text, its edges singed, its letters half dissolved by time. It once belonged to his teacher, who vanished decades ago, the same wandering adept who had come through this city long ago, leaving behind a page of riddles and the faint smell of brimstone. Elias has studied those words all his life. He knows now what they mean, that the metal and the man reflect one another. As the lead aspires to become gold, his master wrote, so too must the soul ascend from ignorance into light. Tonight, he decides to test that belief. He takes a piece of dull grey lead and holds it over the fire until it glows faintly red. Then he places a polished steel mirror behind it, angled so that both the lead and his face catch the same flame. The heat warps the air. His reflection ripples two faces overlapping, one human, one molten. For a heartbeat, they seem to merge. He feels the room tilt, as if something larger is leaning close to listen. He speaks softly to the fire, as his teacher once did. "Show me what I am," he says. The lead quivers, sweating beads of silver that roll across the table. In them, he sees himself again, not older, not younger, but endless, flickering in each drop like a memory trying to take form. The mirror behind him fogs over, then clears, revealing his own gaze staring back, calm and unfamiliar. It is as though the metal has become his conscience. Hours pass. The coals fade to embers. Elias writes his results in careful Latin. The metal does not transform, but remembers. The change is in the observer. He closes the book and sits in the dark, listening to the faint ticking of the cooling metal, like the heartbeat of a dying god. When morning comes, frost coats the window once more. The fire is out, yet the room still glows faintly, not with heat, but with realization. He understands now why alchemists called themselves sons of the art. The furnace is only a mirror. The true crucible is the soul, and what one melts within it determines whether one becomes gold or ash. Outside, the first snow begins to fall. Elias opens the door and lets the cold air rush in. He breathes deeply, the world tasting of iron and purity. Behind him, on the table, the mirror still stands cracked now, but shining. It no longer shows his face, only light. The workshop no longer hides in monasteries or cellars. It stands in plain sight now, a stone building with tall, arched windows and the faint hum of ambition leaking through every crack. The century has changed, and with it, the world's patience. The men who once whispered to metals by candlelight now work by the blaze of lanterns filled with whale oil, their hands steady, their hearts less so. They call themselves natural philosophers. The church no longer burns them. The kings pay them. yet beneath their white coats and ink-stained fingers, the old fever burns the same. Inside one such laboratory in Basel, the smell of salt and copper is thick enough to taste. Glass retorts line the benches like crystal organs. A young scholar named Paracelsus paces between them, his lantern swinging, scattering gold light across the walls. He is not the first to merge medicine and alchemy, but perhaps the first to do so without apology. He scoffs at superstition, at monks who pray while their patients die. The body, he tells his pupils, is a vessel. The world is its pharmacy. God hides remedies in stone, leaf, and flame, and the true physician must learn to read his handwriting. He opens a small vial of mercury, the metal quivering like liquid moonlight. His students lean in as he pours a single drop into a mixture of sulfur and wine spirit. The reaction hisses a whisper between matter and miracle. Paracelsus smiles. To him, alchemy is no longer the search for gold, but the restoration of balance, a bridge between creation and cure. Where the old masters sought eternity, he seeks vitality. To heal, he says, is to transmute. At night, when his apprentices sleep, he sits alone by the furnace. The flames cast shadows that twist across his notes, where drawings of organs blur into planetary diagrams. The same correspondences that once ruled the heavens now map the body. Mars governs the blood, Saturn the bones, Venus the heart. Each illness, he believes, is a disturbance in this cosmic harmony. Each remedy an act of alchemy meant to remind flesh of its divine geometry. Outside, the Reformation tears through Europe like fire through parchment. Priests are overthrown, relics shattered, libraries burned. Faith and science duel in the open streets. But inside the lab, the lantern burns on steady, unwavering. The scholars here care less for dogma than for transformation. One experiments with distilling spirit from grain, another isolates crystals from seawater, claiming they carry the taste of eternity. Their language changes, essence, tincture, solution, but their hearts still echo the old promise that nothing truly dies, only changes its form. Paracelsus writes late into the night. His lantern flickers, and the walls seem to breathe. He knows the world is turning, that the alchemist's fire is becoming something new, something measurable, something that will one day forget his name. But, before that happens, he adds one final note to his journal. The true light of the laboratory is not fire, but will. The flame only obeys the heart that dares to look within it. When dawn comes, his apprentices find him asleep at his desk, his quill fallen from his hand. The furnace has gone cold, but the room is filled with light, the kind that does not come from the sun. It is the glow of the lantern still burning, steady as breath, illuminating the same truth that has followed alchemists since the Nile. The world can be studied, even mastered, but never without reverence. Winter settles over Basel like a grey shroud. The Rhine moves sluggishly under a crust of ice, and the wind from the Alps cuts through the city like glass. Inside the lecture hall, the air is thick with the heat of bodies and the scent of smoke. A young physician stands before the crowd, broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, his hands calloused from work rather than prayer. His name is Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, but the world will remember him by another, Paracelsus. He speaks not with the soft reason of a scholar, but with the fire of a heretic. Your Aristotle is dead, he tells the university men, who glare at him from their benches. Your Galen never saw the inside of a wound. Truth lives not in parchment, but in the body of man. He lifts a vial of clear liquid distilled alcohol, his own invention, and holds it up to the light. This, he says, is spirit, not metaphor, but matter refined to its purest form. In the smallest drop, God hides his power. Murmurs ripple through the hall. Some cross themselves, others take notes, their pens trembling. Paracelsus feels the tremor in his own hand and smiles. It is not fear, it is recognition. For years, he has walked from town to town, curing soldiers, miners, and beggars, learning their diseases and their poisons. He has seen the inside of life, the way bone splits, the way flesh tries to heal. He has learned that medicine cannot rely on memory alone, it must rely on experiment. In this, he is more alchemist than doctor. At night, he works in his chambers, a room cluttered with glass and metal, smelling of sulfur and vinegar. The furnace glows in one corner, its light painting the walls in amber and shadow. He wears no robes, no cross, only a leather apron darkened by flame. Before him stand 3 flasks, each filled with a different essence: sulfur for the soul, mercury for the spirit, salt for the body. To him, these are not symbols but truths, the holy trinity of matter itself. When balanced, they form life. When divided, they decay. As above, so below, he murmurs, pouring the mixtures together. The liquid hisses, turning milky white. He believes all sickness is imbalance, a corruption of harmony within the body's alchemical order. The physician's task is not merely to treat symptoms, but to restore equilibrium. His medicine is distillation, purification, transformation. To cure the flesh, he writes, is to redeem the soul from confusion. Outside, the church grows uneasy. His sermons in the square, half science, half prophecy, draw crowds larger than those of priests. When the university accuses him of heresy, he burns their medical texts in the marketplace, the pages curling into gold-edged ash. Books, he shouts, cannot heal. Only fire can. But in private, he is gentler. He tends to the sick with quiet compassion, cradling the dying as if they are crucibles too fragile to break. When he holds their hands, he sees the same spark that lives in mercury under heat, restless, luminous, unwilling to fade. One night, after treating a plague victim, he returns to his lab and collapses before the furnace. The fire within it burns low. "Teach me," he whispers, not to God, but to the flame. "Let me know what you know." In the coals, something glows back, not revelation, not words, but understanding. That man and matter, faith and fire, are one and the same. By dawn, Paracelsus will rise and continue his work, leaving behind not riches, but rebellion. He will die poor, yet his writings will outlive him, scattering across Europe like sparks, for he has done what few dared. He has given alchemy a heartbeat not in gold, but in flesh. The year is 1527, and the scent of rot clings to every street. Basel hums with sickness. The plague has returned, creeping through alleys like a silent fog. Bells toll without pause. Men burn herbs in the doorways of their homes. Priests speak of penance. Physicians speak of fate. But in a dim room near the city's edge, Paracelsus speaks of balance. He stands before his furnace, sleeves rolled, face slick with sweat. On the table beside him lies a row of glass vials, each filled with a different color: deep red, pale gold, clouded white. Outside, the world prays for deliverance. Inside, he tries to make it. He calls it the elixir vitae, the medicine that would restore not only the body, but the spirit that sustains it. If man is made of 3 parts, he tells his pupils, body, soul, and essence, then medicine must heal all 3. What is cured in the flesh must also be cured in the fire. He begins his work before dawn. The air in the laboratory trembles with heat, and chemical scent sulfur, wine spirit, herbs crushed between stones. Every movement is deliberate. He pours, stirs, whispers to the mixture as though it were a patient. The liquid changes color with each breath of the flame, from gold to green to violet, alive in ways no mere matter should be. His students watch in silence, crossing themselves when the fumes grow too thick. Paracelsus does not believe in gold or silver as salvation. His gold is purity, his silver clarity. He has learned that the body itself is a crucible, and that disease is its corruption, an imbalance of internal elements. The soul, he says, is the physician of the body, but who heals the soul when it is sick? His elixir is meant to do both, to bind the visible and invisible into harmony. Days pass without sleep. The city's bells toll for the dead, yet his workshop burns with life. Once, a flask explodes, sending shards into his arm. He bleeds freely, smiling faintly as his pupils rush to bandage him. Even pain, he says, is transformation. He writes between experiments, his notes a mixture of scripture and chemistry. The sun within man is the heart. Its fire must be tended as the furnace. When at last the mixture cools, the result is a liquid so clear it seems invisible. He lifts the vial, and for a moment the light refracts into 7 colors, the whole spectrum caught in a single drop. Behold, he whispers, all of nature reduced to one essence. He tastes it, just a drop on the tongue, and feels the burn travel through him, not as pain but as awakening. His heart races, his vision sharpens. He laughs softly. Not immortality, he says, but remembrance. The body remembers what it was meant to be. Word spreads quickly. Nobles send messengers with coin and promises. Priests send letters heavy with warning. Paracelsus answers neither. He keeps the elixir in a small vial wrapped in cloth and carries it wherever he goes, not as proof, but as prayer. To him, it is unfinished, a symbol of what might yet be perfected, both in matter and in man. At night, he sits by his window, watching the plague fires burn across the valley. The city glows with suffering, and still, he believes, to heal the world, he writes, one must first learn how it breaks. He closes the vial and places it over his heart. The flame of the lamp beside him flickers and steadies, 2 lights burning in unison, one born of fire, the other of faith. It begins, as all transformations do, with fire. Basel sleeps under a restless sky, its chimneys coughing smoke into the dark. Inside the lecture hall, Paracelsus lights a single lamp. Its flame flares, then steadies, painting the walls in gold and shadow. Before him sits a heap of parchment, the writings of Galen and Avicenna, copied and worshipped by scholars for 1,000 years. To question them is heresy. To burn them is blasphemy. He strikes a flint. The paper catches quickly, curling inward like a dying leaf. Students gasp. One crosses himself. No book, Paracelsus says, his voice calm over the crackle, is holier than truth. The fire climbs higher, licking the ink, devouring certainty. Your masters wrote in darkness, I will write in flame. For a moment, his eyes shine as if reflecting another world, one where the physician is priest and chemist, and the furnace, the altar. Word spreads through the city before dawn. The university brands him mad. The priests whisper sorcery. But others, miners, soldiers, apothecaries, begin to listen. He speaks to them not in Latin but in the language of work, of metal and salt, of sweat and sickness. He walks among them, curing wounds, setting bones, distilling remedies from herbs that grow between the cobblestones. He drinks wine with them in taverns, and under the smell of smoke and vinegar, they see what he truly is. Not a rebel against God, but against ignorance. The age itself is changing. The Reformation has torn the map of Europe into faith and fire. Churches crumble, presses run, blood fills the gutters of cities. In this chaos, Paracelsus finds purpose. He calls for a new covenant between matter and spirit, between healing and understanding. The alchemist, he writes, is the servant of creation. His rebellion is not against heaven, but against blindness. He travels constantly from Basel to Strasbourg, from Zurich to Innsbruck, carrying little more than his manuscripts and a single vial of his elixir. He cures where he can, argues where he must, and leaves behind a trail of astonishment and resentment. Physicians curse him, peasants praise him. In every town, he lights the same fire, sometimes in the hearths of the sick, sometimes in the hearts of the curious. Once, in Nuremberg, a magistrate orders him to stop teaching. The world is not ready, the man warns. Paracelsus laughs. Then I will make it ready. That night, he gathers his students in a candlelit tavern and dictates the book of nature. All that burns, lives, he tells them, and what lives, burns. His words move like sparks through the air, igniting something that will outlast his flesh. He grows older, thinner, his lungs scarred from years of smoke and mercury. But his fire never dims. Even when his enemies confiscate his manuscripts, he begins anew, scratching formulas on scraps of cloth and wood. Knowledge, he says, must survive like the soul, through death into transformation. When he dies years later, they bury him in an unmarked grave. Yet in laboratories across Europe, men who never met him light their own furnaces and whisper his name. For in teaching them to rebel against dogma, he has taught them the oldest secret of alchemy, that the fire itself is never destroyed. It only finds new vessels to burn. A century passes, and the furnace changes shape. The monasteries fall silent, their libraries plundered or reborn as universities. The word alchemy still lingers on men's tongues, but it is said now with suspicion, half mockery, half awe. The fires have not gone out, they have simply grown brighter, steadier, cleaner. Glass replaces clay, precision replaces prayer. Where once the alchemist whispered to metals in the language of gods, the new thinkers begin to speak to them in the language of measure. The birth of chemistry begins not with revelation, but with counting. In a small workshop in Leiden, a man named Jan Baptista van Helmont watches vapor rise from a basin of acid. He writes not of Hermes or divine correspondences, but of gas, a word he invents to name what the ancients could not, the breath of matter itself. He measures its weight, its pressure, its volume. Where Paracelsus spoke of spirit, Van Helmont finds evidence. Yet in secret, he still bows to the flame before beginning. Old habits die slowly, and reverence does not vanish when it finds a new vocabulary. Across Europe, the laboratories multiply. The air fills with the clink of glass, the hiss of flame. Robert Boyle, an Englishman with a restless mind, builds his famous air pump, trapping the invisible and forcing it to confess its laws. He calls his book The Sceptical Chimist, a declaration that alchemy must finally submit to proof. He believes that truth must survive the furnace of experiment, as gold survives the fire. And yet, though he speaks of pressure and atoms instead of angels and elements, he too keeps the language of transmutation alive. The chemist, he writes, is the artisan of nature, finishing what she began. The old alchemists would recognize the rhythm of these new studies, the long nights by candlelight, the breath held as metal shifts from solid to smoke, the small awe that comes when a dull grey powder flashes into color. What has changed is not wonder, but permission. The church no longer dictates what can be sought. Kings and merchants fund the furnaces now, hungry for knowledge that yields profit as well as enlightenment. Saltpeter makes gunpowder, acids clean silver, distillation perfects spirits. The sacred has become practical, but in every measurement lies a trace of magic. In Paris, a young man named Antoine Lavoisier weighs the ash of burned wood and discovers that nothing truly disappears. Matter changes form but never vanishes the same law the alchemists once intuited by faith. He calls it conservation. They would have called it eternity. When he watches water split into gas and flame, he thinks not of the philosopher's stone, but of oxygen. Yet the glow in his eyes is the same that burned in the house of life along the Nile. By the close of the 17th century, the word alchemy has faded into myth, its symbols relegated to the margins of history. But in every laboratory, in the careful weighing of powders, in the quiet reverence before the experiment, its pulse endures. The dream has simply changed its name. The men of this new age believe they have killed the mystic and born the scientist. But as they watch flame reveal the hidden laws of matter, they are haunted by a feeling they cannot quite dismiss, that in chasing reason, they have stumbled upon something older still, a truth the ancients already knew, that knowledge, like metal, must pass through fire before it can shine. By the dawn of the 17th century, Europe no longer dreams of turning lead into gold, or so it claims. The old masters are gone, their manuscripts fading beneath the dust of libraries. Scholars speak now of principles, reactions, and elements instead of spirits, humours, and essences. Yet beneath the language of reason, the same ancient hunger still burns. The furnace has moved from the monastery to the academy, but the light it casts is unchanged. The philosopher's stone, once the promise of divine transmutation, survives now as metaphor. Men speak of it not as a mineral, but as an idea, the symbol of perfection, the joining of opposites, the reconciliation of matter and mind. The alchemists who remain know this quietly. In Prague, Heinrich Kunrath publishes Amphitheatrum Sapientiae Aeternae, a book that marries geometry and mysticism, its pages engraved with symbols that swirl between scripture and chemistry. The stone, he writes, is not found in the earth, but in the heart that understands the earth. The Church condemns him, but his drawings spread like wildfire among the curious. In England, a man named Robert Flood carries on the vision. His diagrams map the universe as a vast alchemical organ, heaven as fire, earth as body, God as breath. He dares to claim that creation itself was the first act of transmutation, the divine word becoming matter. To his peers, he is both scholar and heretic. Yet when he speaks of the world as a living furnace, even his critics fall silent. They sense what he senses, that science, stripped of spirit, is a hollow vessel. The laboratories of this new age are brighter, cleaner, but no less holy. Glass retorts gleam like cathedrals in miniature. Experiments are recorded in ledgers rather than parables, but their purpose remains the same: to find unity amid division. The philosopher's stone has become a metaphor for knowledge itself, the ultimate synthesis, the spark that will bind heavens, order to the laws of earth. Among these thinkers walks a young student with sharp eyes and trembling hands, Isaac Newton. To his colleagues, he is a mathematician, a genius of gravity and motion. Yet in the solitude of his study, he turns not to numbers but to flame. His shelves are filled with crucibles and retorts, his journals with strange symbols. He copies alchemical manuscripts by hand, searching not for wealth, but for wisdom. The stone, he writes in his coded notes, is the thing which is one, yet becomes three, and again one. His experiments are as meticulous as his equations, but what he seeks cannot be measured. For Newton, and the few like him, alchemy is not superstition. It is scripture written in matter, the echo of creation's first chemistry. They understand what Jabir and Hermes once knew, that knowledge is never purely physical. To alter matter is to alter the soul that observes it. By the end of the century, the stone has passed beyond laboratories altogether. Poets write of it as truth, philosophers as enlightenment, and physicians as health. It becomes the emblem of transformation itself, the power to turn ignorance into understanding, despair into wonder. The world may call it metaphor now, but in the flicker of every flame the old promise remains, that something base within us can still be refined, that the dross of human doubt can still, by patience and fire, be turned into gold. And though no one admits it aloud, every scholar, every chemist, every dreamer who leans over a glowing furnace still hopes, in the quiet of his heart, to find the stone. Europe trembles on the edge of revelation and ruin. The wars of faith have left its cities scarred, its people restless, hungry not only for bread but for meaning. The churches no longer satisfy the soul, and the laboratories have grown too cold for the heart. It is in this strange dawn, between mysticism and reason, that a rumor begins to bloom, whispered first in taverns, then in universities, then in the courts of kings. It tells of a brotherhood, secret and benevolent, whose members possess the wisdom of all ages. They are called the Rosicrucians. No one has seen them, yet their presence feels everywhere. Pamphlets circulate across Germany and France, unsigned and printed in secret presses. The Fama Fraternitatis. They are called the fame of the brotherhood. Within their pages lies a new gospel, equal parts alchemy, faith, and philosophy. The texts speak of a man named Christian Rosenkreutz, a mystic who traveled through Arabia and Egypt, learning the hidden arts of transformation before returning to Europe to plant a garden of knowledge that would one day bloom into enlightenment. The tale spreads like pollen in the wind. Scholars debate its authenticity. Priests condemn it. Dreamers cling to it. For within its pages is a promise that alchemy was never about gold, but illumination. Our building, the pamphlet declares, is not for riches but for the health of man. It describes a fraternity that works in silence, using the secrets of nature to heal the world. They speak of a universal reformation, a renewal of all learning, all faith, all society. And though no one can prove the brotherhood exists, its invisible perfume fills the air. In Nuremberg, a printer named Valentin reads The Farmer by candlelight. He is a scholar, weary of the church's corruption and the emptiness of dogma. The words strike him like thunder. We speak unto you by parables, yet we mean none other than the reformation of the whole wide world. He begins to write his own treatise, blending scripture with chemistry, ethics with experiment. He signs it not with his name, but with the symbol of the rose and cross. Soon others follow: physicians, astrologers, mathematicians, each claiming to have heard from the brotherhood, each adding their own petals to the myth. By the time the century turns, the Rosicrucian idea has taken root across Europe. Some call it heresy, others call it hope. In Paris, scholars meet in hidden rooms to discuss the invisible college. In London, a young thinker named Francis Bacon dreams of a scientific utopia he calls the New Atlantis, where knowledge will be shared freely and nature studied without fear. Everywhere, the air hums with possibility. But as with all flowers, the bloom attracts both beauty and decay. Charlatans appear, selling false initiations and powders of immortality. Monarchs send spies to seek the brotherhood's secrets, hoping to harness their wisdom for empire. The true adepts, if they exist, vanish deeper into anonymity, leaving behind only symbols: a rose blooming on a cross, a reminder that all transformation requires suffering before perfection. When the last of the pamphlets fades from circulation, the world moves on. The wars resume, the presses print new dogmas, and the rose seems to wither, yet its seeds remain, hidden in the minds it awakened. For the dream of the Rosicrucians was never a society of men, but a state of being, a secret garden within the soul, where the alchemist's work continues quietly, eternally, waiting for another spring. And though no one will ever find the brotherhood's house of learning, its door remains open, invisible and eternal, marked by the same sigil that has crossed centuries of flame and faith: the rose, blooming in the ashes. The door to Isaac Newton's study was always locked. To his students at Cambridge, he was the very image of reason, a mathematician of unmatched precision, the man who could turn the fall of an apple into a law of nature. Yet behind that door, in the dim light of candles that burned long into the morning, another Newton lived. This one worked not with telescopes and prisms, but with crucibles and retorts. His hands were blackened with soot, his sleeves singed with flame. The father of modern science was, in secret, the last great alchemist. The room was a world unto itself. Piles of manuscripts lay beside jars of powder, labeled with strange Latin names: antimonium, mercurius, vitriolum. The smell of sulfur and vinegar hung heavy in the air. On one shelf rested a small furnace, its coals glowing faintly red. Here, the man who measured the heavens sought to measure the soul of matter. To the world outside, gravity and light defined him. To himself, the universe was still a divine cipher, and alchemy, its forgotten grammar. He approached his work as he approached his mathematics, through patience, observation, and faith. In the stillness of night, he would heat his mixtures slowly, watching as metals bled into vapor, then cooled back into crystal. Each color, each hiss, each transformation was a sign. In one letter, written in cipher to an unknown correspondent, He confessed, "The work of the fire is the work of God hidden in matter." For Newton, the furnace was a chapel, and every experiment a prayer whispered to creation. To his contemporaries, the alchemists had long become curiosities, relics of a credulous age. But Newton did not chase gold or immortality. He believed the philosopher's stone to be a truth more profound than metal could bear, a divine substance that bound all things together, the same invisible force that moved the planets through the void and bound the apple to the earth. If he could find the stone, he could glimpse the hand of the Creator, not as miracle, but as law. His journals, later discovered in secret trunks, reveal thousands of pages written in code, calculations of temperature and color, lists of experiments, meditations on biblical prophecy. He believed that the key to all creation lay in correspondence, that every process in nature reflected the mind of God. The orbit of the moon, the growth of a crystal, the purification of mercury, all were variations of the same eternal act, the transformation of chaos into order. Sometimes, when fatigue overtook him, he would step outside into the garden. The air would be cold, the stars above sharp as glass. He would look up and imagine them as furnaces, two endless crucibles where matter itself was forever transmuted. The cosmos was his laboratory, and the laws he would one day publish in Principia were not the death of alchemy, but its culmination. For in truth, Newton never abandoned the old art, he refined it. He replaced the alchemist's prayer with the scientist's equation, but the longing remained the same: to touch the eternal through the finite, to glimpse the divine mechanism beneath the veil of matter. When he died in 1727, they buried him in Westminster Abbey as a saint of reason. Yet even as his tomb was sealed, the ashes of his furnace still clung to his manuscripts, black as the night he once illuminated. For Newton's greatest discovery was not gravity or light. It was that the fire of the alchemists and the light of the mathematicians were one and the same flame, burning in the same endless pursuit. To understand how the universe dreams itself into being, the lamps in Paris burn late into the night, their glow catching the fog that rolls across the narrow streets. Outside, the world hums with reason. Philosophers debate in candlelit salons, merchants tally ledgers with meticulous care, and the presses churn out pamphlets declaring the supremacy of thought over superstition. It is the age of enlightenment, and yet within laboratories tucked beneath the city, the old fires of alchemy still burn. The flame no longer hisses with the same secrecy, but it glows with intent to understand, to measure, to perfect. In a small attic above a perfumer's shop, a chemist leans over his retorts, the air fragrant with distilled oils. He weighs salts and powders with the precision of a mathematician, his hands steady, his mind attuned to patterns. The crucible glows red, and as the metals shift, he observes them closely. This is no longer the priestly meditation of the ancients, nor the secretive craft of wandering adepts. It is methodical, deliberate, and yet it is still sacred. The act of transformation has become a ritual of reason. Across the city, the Académie des Sciences gathers scholars from across Europe. Men speak of oxygen, mercury, and combustion as if they were letters in a divine alphabet. They do not call it magic, they call it chemistry. And yet, the terminology is only half of the truth. Every experiment, every measurement is shadowed by the same desire that moved Jabir, Paracelsus, and Newton. The pursuit of the perfect form, the attempt to glimpse the eternal within the finite. In his private study, Antoine Lavoisier carefully weighs a sample of phosphorus. Noting its combustion, he records the transformation of air into flame with the same awe that once accompanied the sight of a crucible glowing beneath Paracelsus's hand. The language has changed, but the fire is the same, patient, demanding, luminous. Every measurement becomes a meditation, every reaction a lesson in the hidden order of count, nature. The philosopher's stone may have been abandoned, but its spirit endures as symbol of the unity of mind and matter, observation and understanding. Outside the city, the world shifts, empires rise and fall, the streets fill with the cries of commerce and the clatter of industry. Science begins to claim its place beside faith, slowly supplanting superstition. Yet the heartbeat of alchemy continues, subtle and persistent. The furnaces are cleaner, the methods more precise, but the goal remains unchanged, to transmute not merely metals, but knowledge itself, and through it, the understanding of the universe. By candlelight, the chemists of the Enlightenment write their findings in journals and letters, sending them to colleagues across the continent. They discuss ratios, temperatures, and reactions, but every note carries an echo of the old art, the whisper of Hermes, the vision of Jabir, the fire of Newton. They may never call it alchemy, but it is still alchemy in essence, a pursuit of perfection, a search for order, a longing to see the hidden forces of the world revealed. And as the sun rises over Paris, illuminating rooftops and spires alike, one can almost imagine the ghosts of ancient alchemists, Egyptians, Arabs, and Europeans alike, smiling quietly in the warmth. Their fire, once hidden, has not vanished. It has merely changed its shape, moving from crucible to retort, from secret manuscript to published treatise, burning quietly in the hearts of those who dare to watch, to measure, and to understand. The Age of Enlightenment is not the end of alchemy, but its rebirth. Its vessels are no longer clay, its words no longer whispered, yet its purpose remains eternal, to illuminate the invisible, to reconcile heaven and earth, to show that the world, in all its chaos, still obeys patterns that can be seen, known, and, perhaps, revered. The streets of London are slick with rain, and fog drifts low over the Thames like a restless spirit. Inside the laboratories tucked behind brick facades, lamps burn steadily, illuminating shelves lined with bottles, vials, and retorts of every size. Glass glimmers under the light, fragile and perfect, as if the walls themselves hold the breath of some unseen alchemist. This is the age of glass, an era in which the secrets of nature can be contained, observed, and measured, yet never fully possessed. In a small workshop near Whitehall, a chemist leans over a row of crystal vessels, his fingers carefully adjusting stoppers and burners. Each flask holds a world of its own, solutions of copper and mercury, tinctures of herbs, powders of unknown origin. The air smells faintly of sulfur and vinegar, of wet stone and candle smoke. Every movement he makes is deliberate, every measurement exact. Where once the furnace demanded faith, the glass demands patience. Every bubble, every color, change, is recorded, logged, and pondered. It is a quiet revolution. The alchemists of old were solitary, their work hidden beneath monasteries or cellars. Now, the fire is observed, measured, and shared. The glass vessels allow it to be seen without touching, to be studied without immediate consequence. The flame no longer hisses in secrecy but dances in clarity, revealing patterns that the human eye could never have grasped before. What was once mystery has become method, yet its mystery remains not diminished, but transformed. Across Europe, similar laboratories hum with the same quiet intensity. In Paris, distillers record the precise temperature at which spirits ignite. In Florence, apothecaries watch how salts react with acids. In Vienna, a chemist weighs powders by the scale of a feather, noting how slight variations change outcomes entirely. Each experiment is a dialogue with matter, a conversation carried out in fire, vapor, and glass. The principles of alchemy endure, even as the language of measurement replaces the language of allegory. Yet, for all the precision, the alchemists still whisper to the flame as if it were alive. In London, a young apprentice watches his master pour mercury into a retort and sees the silver coil itself, trembling, reflecting the candlelight. He shivers. "It watches us," he whispers. The master smiles. "No," he says softly, "it does not watch. It mirrors, and in the mirror we see ourselves. Every experiment is reflection, every reaction, a lesson not only in matter, but in the observer who dares to touch it. The glass allows for patience, for observation, for repetition, the very qualities the old masters sought through prayer and ritual. A single drop can hold hours of study, a single color change can teach a lifetime of restraint. In this era, alchemy becomes both practical and philosophical, blending the old reverence with the new rigor. The crucible may be replaced by glass, the flame by measured heat, but the aim remains: to understand transformation, to reconcile material with immaterial, to glimpse the laws that govern the invisible. As night falls, the lamps glow against the mist, and the streets of London lie silent. Inside the workshop, the glass vessels hum faintly, reflecting candlelight like stars trapped in crystal. In the flicker, one can almost see the ghosts of Jabir, Paracelsus, and Newton watching, guiding, whispering in a language of fire and matter. The age of glass is not the death of alchemy. It is its translation, a new vessel for the same eternal pursuit, to see the hidden, to measure the sacred, and to hold eternity, if only for a moment, within the fragile transparency of a vessel. The streets of London in the late 18th century are dark and narrow, lit only by the flicker of oil lamps and the occasional flare of torchlight. The fog rolls through alleys like smoke from a distant furnace, curling around doorways and across cobblestones. Within this gloom, hidden behind the facades of ordinary buildings, the old fires of alchemy burn again, not in monasteries or university labs, but in drawing rooms, candlelit chambers, and forgotten cellars. It is the Gothic revival, a time when the pursuit of the arcane and the rational meet in shadowed harmony. In a small chamber above a tailor's workshop, a young gentleman carefully arranges his instruments. Glass retorts, brass balances, and small crucibles gleam faintly in the candlelight. He pours distilled spirits into a vial of powdered metals, watching as the solution smokes and coils, shifting color from pale gray to copper, and then to ruby red. The room smells of sulfur and resin, a scent that seems to carry with it centuries of memory. The experiment is meticulous, precise, yet it holds the thrill of danger. One misstep, one spark, and the mixture could consume the table, the lamp, or the man himself. The Gothic revival brings with it a fascination for the strange, the ornate, the forbidden. Men and women, inspired by tales of Hermetic wisdom and ancient Egyptian lore, fill their studies with symbols of fire and transformation. In Paris, chemists study the writings of Kunrath and Flood, tracing the elaborate diagrams of crucibles and celestial spheres. In London, noblemen experiment with tinctures and essences, blending science and superstition. Even in the drawing rooms of society, manuscripts describing the philosopher's stone are read in secret, and experiments with mercury, antimony, and sulfur are conducted behind locked doors. Yet this revival is not merely decorative, it is a renewal of purpose. Alchemy, though long stripped of its religious overtone, still thrives as a philosophy of transformation. Scholars and amateurs alike believe that the natural world holds hidden correspondences, that metals, spirits, and stars are bound by laws that only careful study can reveal. Every crucible, every flame, every color change becomes a meditation, a ritual of understanding. Even skepticism cannot erase the thrill of discovery that dances across the face of the apprentice as he lifts a flask and sees the reflection of fire in liquid metal. In this age, the boundaries between the mystical and the scientific blur. The Gothic revival carries with it an aesthetic of darkness and grandeur. Chandeliers drip wax over tables of instruments, stained glass throws fractured light across floors, and the shadows themselves seem to move in response to the flicker of flame. For those who practice the art, the aesthetic is not ornament, it is instruction. The symbols, the architecture, the ambiance, all reinforce the lesson that matter and spirit, reason and mystery are inseparable. By night, the city hums with hidden flame. Laboratories and private studies glow faintly in the fog, and behind each shuttered window, the pursuit continues. The refinement of metals, the study of natural forces, the search for balance between the visible and invisible. The Gothic revival is not a return to superstition. It is a bridge, a world in which the fire of the alchemists lives on, reborn in the shadow and light of a new age, and in the glow of the lamps, in the hiss of liquids, and in the shimmer of molten metal, one can almost hear the echo of the ancients. Jabir, Paracelsus, Newton, their voices, faint but insistent, whispering the same truth that has carried through centuries. Transformation is eternal, and the fire never dies. London in the late 19th century is a city of gaslight and fog, of cobblestones slick with rain, and the distant clatter of carriage wheels echoing through narrow alleys. Within its maze of streets and hidden courtyards, a new kind of society gathers, one that seeks not wealth, not power, but the hidden wisdom of ages. They call themselves the Golden Dawn. They are adepts, philosophers, and mystics who claim descent, not by blood, but by purpose. From the long line of alchemists, hermetic scholars, and secret societies that have whispered through history since the banks of the Nile, the initiates meet in rooms suffused with incense, the air heavy with the scent of myrrh and crushed herbs. Lamps glow dimly, casting shadows that dance across symbols drawn on the floors and walls. Circles within triangles, serpents coiled around chalices, stars and suns etched with precision. These are no mere decorations. Every line, every curve, is part of a ritual, a meditation on transformation, a bridge between the visible world and the hidden. The adepts understand that in geometry, as in matter, lies the key to the divine. In the quiet of the chamber, a master instructs a young initiate in the use of the elemental correspondences: fire for will, water for emotion, air for thought, earth for stability. The student trembles as he mixes powders and tinctures, watching the reactions in small retorts and crucibles. Alchemy, the master whispers, is not merely the pursuit of gold. It is the transformation of the self. Matter obeys only the prepared mind. Every experiment is a lesson in patience, observation, and the subtle art of discernment, the same principles that guided Paracelsus, Newton, and countless others before them. The Golden Dawn is more than chemistry. It is ritual, meditation, and philosophy intertwined. The members study astrology, Kabbalah, Hermetic texts, and the ancient manuscripts brought west by translators from Toledo and Venice. They believe that the universe is a reflection of the self, that understanding one's own inner alchemy unlocks the laws of nature. When a flask glows with a hue that cannot be named, or a solution crystallizes unexpectedly, they see not chance, but the hand of harmony, guiding them toward insight. Outside, the city moves oblivious. Horses clatter over wet cobblestones, and factory smoke rises in grey columns to meet the fog. Within the society, the past converges with the present. Egyptian priests, medieval alchemists, Paracelsus's fire, and Newton's experiments all find their echo in the rituals and laboratories of the Golden Dawn. Each candle lit, each symbol traced in chalk, is an acknowledgement of the long lineage of those who sought not only to transform metals, but to comprehend the hidden order of the cosmos. At the end of a long night, the initiates close the doors, leaving the lamps to burn low. The air is thick with incense, the shadows still shifting across the floors. Outside, fog swirls along the streets, concealing the world as it always does. But within the chamber, a small fire continues to glow, quiet, persistent, eternal. The Golden Dawn may be secret, its methods hidden, its members unknown to the masses, yet the flame they tend is the same flame that has burned for millennia, the fire of knowledge, transformation, and the relentless pursuit of understanding that alchemy has always promised. The gaslights of Victorian London flicker through the fog, casting long, wavering shadows across the narrow streets. Inside a townhouse on Fleet Street, a different kind of light burns softer, warmer, and tinged with smoke. Here, the laboratory and the séance table share the same room, as though science and spirit are two sides of the same coin. Beakers and crucibles gleam alongside crystal balls and tarot cards, flasks of mercury rest beside wax candles, and the scent of sulfur and lavender mingles in the air. It is a room of paradox, rationality and mysticism, measurement and meditation, inquiry and devotion. Dr. Alistair Crowther, a physician and student of the Hermetic arts, moves with careful hands, tending both the furnace and the circle of candles. On the table, a mixture of salts and distilled essences glows faintly under the low light. He adjusts the heat, noting the color, consistency, and faint aroma of the solution. At the same time, the medium beside him whispers in soft tones, tracing the outline of a spirit in the air above a crystal sphere. To the uninitiated, it might appear chaotic superstition and chemistry mixed indiscriminately, but Crowther knows that the act is deliberate. Each pulse of flame, each word spoken, is a part of the same experiment, the study of transformation, both physical and spiritual. In one corner, a student records every detail meticulously. Mercury condenses in a thin silver sheen on the edge of a retort. The spirit of a long-dead alchemist is said to whisper its approval across the table. Crowther pauses, fingers hovering above the mixture, and recites the Hermetic phrase, "As above, so below." The words are both prayer and principle. The furnace hisses in reply, the mercury gleams brighter, and the candle flames bend slightly, as if acknowledging the command. In this room, matter and spirit obey the same laws, or at least the same intent. The séances are not merely theatrical. Crowther believes that spirits, like metals, hold traces of the laws that govern them. A human soul, once departed, interacts with the world in subtle ways, leaving impressions that can be read, interpreted, and perhaps guided. He teaches his pupils to watch, to measure the faintest flicker in a candle, the smallest shift of air, the slightest trembling of a crystal. Each observation is an experiment. Each whisper may contain knowledge, each vibration a lesson in the hidden order of the universe. At midnight, the air grows thick. Crowther leans over a retort, stirring carefully while listening to the medium's voice rise in chant. The liquid shifts from pale amber to deep crimson, and for a moment it seems to pulse with life. The shadows of the room flicker across his face, revealing determination, awe, and a kind of quiet terror, the recognition that discovery carries both wonder and danger. By dawn, the candles are spent, the retorts cooled, and the crystal sphere dim. Crowther records his results, the reactions of metals, the subtle movements of unseen forces, the correspondence between flame and spirit. Outside, London wakes to fog and soot, unaware that within one townhouse, centuries of alchemical knowledge, Egyptian, Arabic, European, converge in a single act of observation. The laboratory and the séance table, science and mysticism, exist side by side, bound by the same pursuit. The revelation of transformation, the eternal dance of the visible and the invisible, and the patient unfolding of the universe's secret. The year is 1801, and the air in London carries a chill of copper and soot. The world has changed. Steam engines groan along the streets, gas lamps blaze in the fog, and newspapers shout the progress of reason. Yet in a modest laboratory on the outskirts of the city, the fire of alchemy still burns, though it burns differently now. No longer does it crackle in crucibles filled with mercury or tin. It is measured, precise, and subtle, caught in the invisible rays that dance through glass prisms, reflected in the spectrum of light itself. Thomas Young leans over his instruments, the glow of oil lamps illuminating his sharp features. Before him, a prism splits sunlight into a ribbon of color, so fine, so delicate, that the spectrum seems almost liquid. He studies it carefully, noting each wavelength, each bend, each refracted angle. In the color, He sees the invisible made visible, the hidden order of nature laid bare. It is, in its own way, the same search that Joubert, Paracelsus, and Newton once pursued, a glimpse into the secret workings of the universe, only now expressed in light, not fire. In this age, alchemy has shed much of its mysticism, but not its essence. Where once metals and salts whispered their secrets in hissing crucibles, photons now carry those secrets through refraction and interference. Young's experiments with light reveal that the world can be observed in patterns previously unseen, that color and form obey laws just as metals do. He writes carefully in his journal, diagrams of rays and prisms forming geometric symphonies across the page. To him, physics is the modern crucible, the photon, a liquid flame. Across Europe, similar discoveries unfold. In Paris, Joseph Fraunhofer traces dark lines in the sun's spectrum, each one a fingerprint of a substance hidden in the heavens. In Vienna, chemists study the absorption of colored liquids, recording their experiments with meticulous precision. The Hermetic principle, once expressed through metals and fire, now finds its echo in optics. As above, so below, in the behavior of light as in the workings of matter. Those who study it know that observation itself becomes a kind of alchemy, transmuting ignorance into insight. Yet even in this scientific age, the old fire persists. Young, late at night, leans back in his chair and imagines the flame of a crucible, its glow mirrored in the glass of his prism. The sensation is almost spiritual, a reminder that discovery, whether in mercury or light, is a dialogue with nature itself. The photon becomes a messenger, subtle, silent, precise, carrying the same message that alchemists have pursued for millennia. Transformation is possible, order can be revealed, and the universe holds its secrets patiently, waiting for those who will watch closely enough. As London sleeps, the prisms cast rainbows across the floor of the laboratory, fragments of the sun captured and tamed. The glow is quiet, but alive, and in the tensor spectrum, Young glimpses what every alchemist has glimpsed, that nature's fire, whether in flame, metal, or photon, burns eternally, illuminating what lies hidden, whispering the patterns that bind matter and mind, soul and world. The age of photons is not the death of alchemy. It is its rebirth, rendered in light, precise and eternal, yet still mysterious, waiting for those willing to see beyond the visible. The streets of London are quiet, save for the distant echo of carriages and the soft hiss of gas lamps along the fog-laden alleys. In a small townhouse on the edge of the city, the final flame of a once great alchemist burns low. His hands tremble slightly, not from age alone, but from the weight of centuries of pursuit. He has spent a lifetime in search of the stone, the elixir, the secret that transforms both matter and man. And now, in the twilight of his existence, he understands that the fire has always been more than chemical. It is the spirit, the mind, the will. John Dee sits at his cluttered table, surrounded by manuscripts, mirrors, and flasks. The room smells of ink, resin, and faint sulfur, the residue of a lifetime spent conversing with forces both earthly and invisible. He has been court advisor, mathematician, and navigator, yet his heart belongs to the laboratory and the study of hidden wisdom. He gazes at the celestial globe beside his desk, its bronze rings catching the glow of the lamp. The stars are no longer mere points of light. They are correspondences, mirrors of the human soul, vessels of a truth only partially understood. In his youth, Dee had walked the streets of London with ambition ablaze, seeking knowledge in libraries, laboratories, and taverns alike. He had met scholars from Paris and Venice, learned the secrets of Hermetic texts, and spent nights in trance, attempting to converse with angels. He had pursued gold and elixirs, yet the lesson of life had always been elusive. Each failed experiment left him both humbled and invigorated. The philosopher's stone was never merely matter to be made. It was the refinement of self, the distillation of intellect, faith, and will. He writes slowly now, quill scratching across vellum, recording the correspondences between the stars, metals, and numbers. He labels diagrams in Greek, Latin, and his own ciphered symbols. This is his legacy, a map of the invisible, a guide to understanding that the universe is more than it appears. The magus may die, but knowledge is immortal. Every student who reads these pages will encounter the same fire, even if it has changed shape. No longer the crucible's flame, but the spark of comprehension in the human mind. Outside, London stirs. Political intrigue, commerce, and gossip pulse through the streets. Few notice the solitary figure bent over his desk in a windowless room, yet inside, centuries of alchemical pursuit coalesce. Metals shimmer, powders glow faintly in glass vials, and the mirrors reflect not only Dee's visage but the subtle light of understanding he has captured. In the last hours, he gazes at the small flame still alive in a copper crucible. It is tiny, flickering, but it speaks. He whispers softly, not for gold, not for fame, but for continuity. May the fire endure, even when the hand is gone. Outside, the fog presses against the windows, cold and indifferent, but inside, the laboratory holds a quiet warmth. The magus may be mortal, but the flame he tended, the lineage of thought he preserved, the pursuit of hidden truth, all endure. When he dies, there is no fanfare, no crowds, no bells. Yet in distant libraries, in secret chambers across Europe, men and women will light furnaces, grind powders, and look to the stars, and in the quiet crackle of flame, they will hear him still whispering that the work of transformation, of mind and matter alike, is eternal. The magus dies, but the fire does not. The streets of London have grown louder with industry, steam rising from chimneys like smoke from an endless crucible. Yet in the quiet corners of the city, tucked behind shuttered windows and up narrow staircases, the fire of alchemy still burns. The age of enlightenment has brought reason, measurement, and method, but there are those who seek what reason cannot fully explain. The occult revival is upon Europe, a flowering of mysticism intertwined with the rigor of science, a bridge between the worlds of light and shadow. In a candle-lit parlor on the north side of the city, a society gathers. Scholars, artists, and gentlemen meet under the guise of conversation, but their purpose is far more arcane. They speak of symbols and correspondences, of elements, stars, and human temperament. They debate the writings of Agrippa, Cunrath, and Paracelsus, tracing the lineage of Hermetic wisdom from the temples of Egypt to the laboratories of Newton. Each member carries a notebook of observations, sketches of crucibles, and diagrams of circles and triangles, a language half mathematical, half mystical, entirely secret. The revival is fueled by fascination with the past. Gothic architecture inspires their designs, candlelight illuminates their symbols, and incense curls across floors where glass and metals rest on polished oak tables. The old Hermetic texts, once dismissed as superstition, are studied anew now with careful eyes, not only for their spiritual insight but for the practical knowledge hidden within. Alchemy, once ridiculed or forbidden, re-emerges as a discipline that embraces both the material and the invisible, the rational and the divine. A young woman named Eleanor watches the proceedings from the corner, her curiosity sharper than most of the men's. She has studied chemistry in secret, reading translations of Jabir and Newton alike. Tonight, she observes a demonstration, a mixture of mercury, sulfur, and distilled alcohol in a small retort, heated carefully over a lamp. The liquid shifts from silver grey to crimson, and the participants whisper in awe. Some call it a manifestation of the philosopher's stone. Others say it is merely a chemical curiosity. Eleanor sees both a reminder that the physical and the mystical are reflections of one another. The members also engage in séance and divination, attempting to commune with spirits and ancient masters. Crystals are laid out on tables, pendulums swing, and chants echo softly through the halls. To outsiders, it appears theatrical, even absurd, but the practitioners understand the point. The laboratory and the séance table are mirrors of one another. Observation, intention, and patience apply to metals and spirits alike. The Hermetic principle endures. As above, so below. Outside, London continues its endless hum of industry. Smoke rises from the factories, and horse-drawn carts clatter over wet cobblestones. Few notice the quiet rooms where flame and glass, ink, incense create worlds unseen. But the flame inside burns steadily, connecting centuries of knowledge. Egyptian priests, Paracelsus, Newton, all echo in the flicker. The occult revival is not merely nostalgia, it is the continuation of a pursuit that began millennia ago. To understand transformation, to reconcile matter with spirit, and to glimpse the hidden order of the world. And as the candles gutter low, the smoke curling above their heads, Eleanor feels it clearly. The fire still lives, patient, eternal, waiting for those willing to watch, to measure, and to believe. The flame of the ancients burns on. The city hums with quiet tension. Paris, London, and Vienna have grown into centers of industry, thought, and inquiry. Yet within hidden chambers, the fire of alchemy persists. It no longer speaks through smoke alone, nor through secret symbols written in margin and ash. Now, it speaks in a language both precise and eternal, the language of transformation. It is a tongue that no single scholar can fully master, yet all who attempt it feel its rhythm in every experiment, every observation, every careful calculation. In a small laboratory in Vienna, a chemist named Franz observes the delicate reaction of antimony and mercury in a retort. The metal curls and twists as the flame heats it, changing from dull grey to a soft silver, then to a subtle rose. Franz leans closer, quill in hand, recording every nuance. The flame is no longer sacred, nor the metal divine, yet he knows instinctively that something ancient persists. He does not speak of spirits or angels, he speaks of patterns, the invisible grammar that governs all matter. The metals are words, the reactions, sentences, the experiments, paragraphs. Across Europe, the same language manifests in varied forms. In Paris, chemists study gases, noting the precise volume and weight, tracing reactions invisible to the eye. In London, natural philosophers split sunlight through prisms, recording the refracted colors as letters in a cosmic alphabet. Each observation is a syllable, each conclusion a clause. The Hermetic principle endures. What is above is reflected below, and what is below echoes above. Even as tools become precise and experiments repeatable, the essence remains that transformation is not merely physical, but intellectual, philosophical, and, in some sense, spiritual. The practitioners of this language understand that mastery requires patience. One cannot rush a reaction, any more than one can rush comprehension. A drop of solution may take hours to crystallize. A subtle variation in temperature may alter outcomes entirely. Observing and recording, measuring and interpreting, these are the verbs of the alchemist's speech. Repetition and reflection form its grammar. Only by long attention, by careful study, can one hope to speak fluently with matter itself. In a private chamber in Prague, an elderly alchemist reflects on his lifetime of work. He has traveled from the monasteries of Germany to the salons of Paris, tracing the lineage of knowledge from Jabir, Paracelsus, and Newton, through the Golden Dawn and Gothic Revival. He writes in Latin, in cipher, in code. Each symbol is deliberate, each diagram a sentence in the unbroken conversation between human curiosity and the universe. All that transforms, he notes, teaches us to observe not only the world, but ourselves. The language of transformation is subtle. It does not promise gold, elixir, or immortality. Instead, it teaches attention, patience, and the recognition of patterns where others see only chaos. Every experiment is a dialogue, every flame, a sentence, every reaction, a story told by the world itself. Those who learn it do not merely manipulate matter, they learn to listen. As evening descends, the city grows quiet, the lamps in the laboratory flicker, and the metals gleam softly under the fading light. Outside, smoke drifts from chimneys, fog rolls over streets, and the hum of life continues. Yet within these walls, the ancient fire burns, its voice patient, eternal, and insistent. The language of transformation endures, carried forward by those who observe, measure, and understand a dialogue with the hidden order of the universe, and a reminder that the work of the alchemists, in every age, is never truly finished. The world has grown faster, louder, brighter, factories hum with the rhythm of pistons and gears, cities swell with commerce and steam, and knowledge spreads in printed volumes that circulate with relentless speed. Yet beneath this age of reason, where chemistry has become science and superstition is dismissed, a new kind of alchemist persists. These modern adepts no longer seek gold or immortality in the old ways. They search instead for transformation in thought, in understanding, in the hidden architecture of reality itself. In laboratories from Berlin to Cambridge, men and women work with elements and compounds whose names would have baffled the alchemists of old. Mercury, sulfur, and antimony are still studied, but alongside oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon, each observed, measured, and catalogued with meticulous care. The tools are different. Analytical balances replace scales of brass, glass retorts are joined by condensers and pipettes, and the flame is often electric rather than coal-fed. Yet the rhythm remains the same. Every experiment begins with observation, every reaction recorded, every failure noted as a step closer to insight. In Paris, a young chemist examines a sample of platinum. She heats it, adds reagents, watches the metal respond in ways subtle and precise. As the crucible hisses and glows, she reflects on the centuries of alchemists who have come before, from the temples of Egypt to the laboratories of Baghdad, from the furnaces of Basel to the candle-lit halls of London. Though the methods have changed, the pursuit is identical: to reveal the hidden structure of nature, to transmute ignorance into knowledge, to glimpse the order that lies beneath appearance. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a physicist manipulates beams of light, using prisms and lenses to study spectra, to divide the sun itself into its constituent colors. The photons respond, bending, splitting, revealing what the eye alone cannot perceive. He records each observation, knowing that in the patterns of light are echoes of the same pursuit that once drove Jabir ibn Hayyan, Newton, and Paracelsus. Transformation now moves at the speed of thought, but its essence, patient, meticulous, devoted, is unchanged. Some of these modern alchemists work in secrecy, following the traditions of the Golden Dawn and the Gothic Revival, blending science with philosophy, observation with meditation. Others are entirely public, publishing journals, giving lectures, teaching the principles of chemistry, physics, and biology. Yet all are linked by the same principle. Transformation is more than matter. It is understanding, perception, and insight, a dialogue between the observer and the universe that continues the work of the ancients in new forms. At the close of each day, as lamps are extinguished and laboratories emptied, the fire, whether in flame, light, or electric current, lingers. The metals cool, the light dims, the instruments rest, yet the pursuit endures. The modern alchemists, though unrecognized by the world outside, carry forward a lineage unbroken by time. They work quietly, observing, recording, and learning, guided by the same eternal principle that has driven seekers since the Nile, that the universe, like the soul, is ever in transformation, and that to witness it fully is to partake in the oldest of arts. And so, in every laboratory, in every careful measurement, in every observation of the invisible, the fire of alchemy, patient, eternal, unyielding, continues to burn. The modern adepts know it not as legend, but as truth, that the work begun in Egypt, refined in Europe, and whispered through centuries, has never ended. The sun sets over Europe, its light catching the spires of Paris, the towers of London, and the chimneys of Vienna. Across centuries and continents, the fire of alchemy has traveled from the temples of Egypt to the laboratories of Baghdad, from the secret chambers of Basel to the candlelit halls of Victorian London. Now, in the quiet of the modern world, it lingers still, not in gold or elixirs, not in philosopher's stones or the promise of immortality, but in the understanding it has left behind. In a laboratory tucked behind a university in Cambridge, a scholar adjusts a retort, watching the vapor swirl and condense. He records each reaction carefully, noting the ratios, the temperature, the exact hue of the resulting compound. To an outsider, it is pure chemistry. To him, it is something more, the echo of thousands of years of pursuit. Every measurement, every observation, every experiment is a conversation with those who came before. Jabir ibn Hayyan, Paracelsus, Newton, the adepts of the Golden Dawn. Their whispers linger in the glass, the flame, the metal. The gold that remains is not wealth, it is knowledge. It is the principle that transformation is possible, that matter and mind, body and soul, are bound by patterns that can be studied, understood, and respected. It is the recognition that the same fire which melted lead, distilled mercury, and split sunlight into spectrum has always been the fire of curiosity, patience, and devotion. The ancients called it sacred, the moderns call it science. The language has changed, but the truth endures. Across Europe, others work in solitude. In Paris, chemists study crystallization, observing the subtle patterns in ice and minerals. In Berlin, physicists manipulate light and electricity, bending the invisible to their will. In Florence, botanists extract oils and essences from plants, uncovering the hidden chemistry of life itself. All of them are modern alchemists, whether they know it or not. Each discovery, each insight, is a shard of the eternal pursuit, the refinement not of metals, but of understanding. And yet, the gold that remains is more than observation. It is inspiration. It is the spark that leads one to question, to experiment, to seek beyond the obvious. It is the patience required to stand over a flame for hours, to measure, to record, to reflect. It is the humility to recognize that transformation requires surrender, that the world will not yield its secrets to the impatient or the arrogant. Every scholar who leans over a glowing retort, every physicist who adjusts a prism, every chemist who traces the curve of a reaction, participates in a lineage unbroken by time. As night falls, the lamps are extinguished, the furnace is cool, and the city sleeps. Yet the fire does not die. It persists in the careful hands of those who observe, in the quiet notes of those who record, in the patient experiments that will one day reveal patterns unseen. The gold that remains is the legacy of the ages, the knowledge, the insight, the understanding that survives even as empires crumble, even as mystics fade, even as flames burn out. And so, in every laboratory, in every careful measurement, in every act of patient observation, the eternal truth endures. Transformation is possible, and the fire that began in Egypt, refined through the centuries, burns still, not as gold, not as legend, but as something far more enduring, the light of understanding, the eternal pursuit of knowledge, the one treasure that no age, no war, no flame can ever truly consume.